Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jacob Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. I know every trail, every rock, and every sound in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. My great-grandfather was half Cherokee. My grandfather worked these mountains, and my father did too. This land is in my blood. But what happened in August of 1976 changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. It was the worst heat wave anyone could remember. The temperature hit 110 degrees for 6 straight days. Streams dried up. Animals hid deep in whatever shade they could find. Even the insects seemed to disappear. The whole mountain felt like it was holding its breath. I was stationed at the Devil's Backbone section of the Blue Ridge Parkway. It's a long, narrow ridge that rises up like the spine of some giant buried beast. The Cherokee used to call it Nun-Yu-Nu-Wee, the Stone Man. They had stories about it, but I never paid much attention to old legends. I was more worried about real problems like lost hikers and bear encounters. On August 13th, my radio crackled to life at 6:30 inches the morning. "Jacob, we got 3 missing hikers on the Backbone Trail," said dispatch. "Last seen yesterday around 4 p.m. at mile marker 5.8. I grabbed my gear, radio, first aid kit, water, flares. The drill was simple. Find them before the heat got worse. People died in weather like this if they weren't careful." The Devil's Backbone Trail runs along the top of the ridge at about 4,000 feet. It's all exposed granite and scrubby pines. No shade, no water. And if you slip off the wrong side, it's a long way down. I'd pulled 3 bodies off those rocks just the year before. I hiked up to where they were last seen. The granite was already hot enough to fry an egg, and it wasn't even 8 a.m. yet. I called out their names: Tom Bradley, Sarah Chen, Mike Warren, all experienced hikers according to their permits. That's when I found the first strange thing. At mile marker 5.9, just off the main trail, I spotted a hiking boot. Then another. They were sitting on a flat piece of granite, but something was wrong. The rubber soles had melted, not just softened, completely melted and fused to the rock like they'd been put on a hot stove. I'd seen heat do crazy things, but never anything like this. The granite around the boots was normal temperature. I could touch it with my bare hands. But those boots were welded to the rock like they'd been hit with a blowtorch. I radioed it in and kept searching. An hour later, I found their campsite. 3 sleeping bags laid out in a perfect circle around a cold fire ring. Their backpacks were arranged in the exact center, opened, with all the contents sorted by type. Food in one pile, clothes in another, electronics in a third. Like someone had been taking inventory. But the weirdest part? There were no footprints leading away from the site. None at all. The sandy patches around the camp should have shown every step, but the ground was smooth as if it had been swept clean. I called for backup. 2 more rangers, Bill Hayes and Maria Santos, hiked up to help with the search. We spread out in a grid pattern, calling the missing hikers' names every few minutes. That's when the mountain got quiet. I mean really quiet. No bird songs, no insect buzz, no wind through the pines. Even our own voices seemed muffled, like the air was too thick to carry sound properly. "Jacob," Maria's voice came through the radio, barely audible. "You need to see this." I found her standing next to a big oak tree about 50 yards from the campsite. She was staring up at the trunk, her face pale despite the heat. Embedded in the bark, 12 feet off the ground, were 4 human teeth, not knocked loose, pressed deep into the wood like someone had hammered them in with incredible force. "How does something like that happen?" Maria asked. I didn't have an answer. The teeth were clean, white, still had bits of root attached, fresh, and there was no way anyone could have climbed up there to put them in the tree. The trunk was smooth, no handholds, no ladder marks in the dirt below. By noon, the temperature hit 115 degrees. We were going through water fast, and none of us wanted to admit what we were all thinking. This wasn't a normal search and rescue anymore. That's when we heard the screaming. It started from the north, down in Copper Hollow, a man's voice yelling for help. We turned toward the sound, but then another scream came from the south. A woman this time. Then a third voice from the east, crying, "Please, somebody help us." The three missing hikers, calling from 3 different directions at the same time. "Split up," I told Bill and Maria. "Each take one direction. Radio check every 10 minutes. But as soon as we separated, the screaming stopped. The mountain went quiet again, quieter than before. My radio produced nothing but static mixed with a low growling sound, like an animal breathing. I waited 15 minutes for the check-in. Nothing from Bill, nothing from Maria. I was alone on the Devil's Backbone, and something was hunting us. I started back toward Maria's last position, calling her name and getting no response. The heat was making everything shimmer like I was looking through water. But I knew these trails. I could navigate them blindfolded, except the trail was wrong. The rock formation I'd passed an hour earlier, a distinctive granite outcrop that looked like a sitting bear, wasn't where it should be. It had moved 20 feet to the left. I stopped and stared at it, feeling sweat roll down my back that had nothing to do with the temperature. Rocks don't move, period. I'd been looking at that formation for 16 years. I knew exactly where it sat relative to the trail marker and the old pine tree with the lightning scar. But there it was, in a completely different spot. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun slowly in a complete circle, never settling on magnetic north. I tapped it, shook it, but it kept spinning like a broken toy. My radio crackled. "Jacob. Jacob, can you hear me?" "Maria, where are you?" "I found them, Jacob. I found all 3. But something's wrong. Something's really wrong. They're..." The transmission cut to static. I ran toward where her voice had come from, jumping over loose rocks and scrubby bushes. The heat hit me like a wall, but I pushed through it. I had to find her. I came to a stop at the edge of Copper Hollow. It's a deep valley between 2 ridges, thick with trees and shadows, even on a day like this. I could see about 100 feet down the slope before the forest swallowed everything. "Maria," I shouted. My voice echoed off the rocks. "Maria, Maria, Maria." Then I heard her voice again, but it was coming from behind me. "Jacob, help me. Please help me." I spun around. Nobody there, just the empty trail and the blazing sun. "Where are you?" "Down here, Jacob. In the hollow. We're all down here." I looked down into the valley again. Nothing but trees and shadows. But her voice was definitely coming from that direction. I started down the slope, using trees to keep from slipping on the loose rocks. The temperature dropped about 10 degrees once I got under the canopy, which should have been a relief. Instead, it felt wrong. The air was thick and still, like being inside a tomb. 50 feet down, I found Maria's radio. It was sitting on a flat rock, still turned on, still transmitting static, but no sign of Maria. That's when I saw the tracks. They were pressed deep into the soft earth near a dried creek bed. But they weren't human footprints or animal paws. They were round impressions, perfectly smooth, about the size of dinner plates. Each one was pressed into the ground so hard it had cracked the soil around the edges. The tracks led deeper into the hollow, but they were spaced impossibly far apart. 12 feet between each print, as if whatever made them had been taking huge leaping steps. I followed them, one hand on my radio, the other on the emergency flare in my belt. The trees grew thicker, blocking out most of the sunlight. I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. The tracks led to a clearing where the creek used to run. In the center stood what looked like a pile of camping gear, backpacks, sleeping bags, hiking boots, water bottles. But it was arranged in a perfect pyramid, like some kind of monument. At the top of the pile was Bill's ranger hat. I approached slowly, calling his name. No answer. I reached for the hat, and that's when I noticed what the pyramid was built on. Bones. Human bones. Old ones, yellowed with age, mixed with fresher remains. Ribs, leg bones, skulls with empty eye sockets staring up at me. Some still had bits of cloth attached, old Civil War-era uniforms, faded and rotting. And at the very bottom, partially buried under the older bones, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A park ranger badge, issued to Thomas Patterson, who disappeared on this same ridge in 1954. They never found his body. I backed away from the pile, my heart hammering. Whatever was happening here had been going on for a long time, decades, maybe longer. That's when I heard the sound behind me, a deep grinding noise, like two massive stones being rubbed together. I turned around slowly. The trees at the edge of the clearing were moving. Not swaying in the wind. There was no wind. They were being pushed aside by something huge, something that moved between the trunks like it was made of liquid shadow. I caught a glimpse of it through the branches. Tall as a building, dark as midnight, with eyes like burning coals. It moved wrong, too fluid for something so large, flowing around obstacles instead of pushing through them. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, scrambling up the slope toward the ridge. Behind me, that grinding sound got louder, and I could feel the ground shaking with each step the thing took. A tree fell across the path in front of me, not blown down by wind, pushed over like a toy. The trunk was 3 feet thick, and it hit the ground hard enough to make me stumble. I vaulted over it and kept running, but I could hear the creature getting closer. The grinding sound was right behind me now, and something that felt like a hot wind was breathing down my neck. I broke out of the tree line onto the main ridge trail. The sunlight was blinding after the darkness of the hollow, but I didn't stop. I ran toward my truck, parked at the trailhead 2 miles away. Behind me, the grinding sound stopped. I looked back. The forest was quiet again, no sign of whatever had been chasing me, but I could feel it watching from the shadows between the trees. I made it to my truck and radioed for help. Emergency response, state police, anyone who would listen. I told them I had 3 missing hikers and 2 missing rangers on the Devil's Backbone Ridge. What I didn't tell them was that I was pretty sure they were all dead, and whatever had killed them was still out there, waiting for the next group of victims to wander into its hunting ground. The state police arrived 2 hours later with a full search and rescue team, 12 officers, 2 bloodhounds, and enough equipment to find a needle in a haystack. I told them everything except the part about the creature. Nobody would believe that until they saw it themselves. Captain Rodriguez took my statement while the team spread out across the ridge, professional, thorough, by the book. He'd handled dozens of missing person cases in the mountains. "You found camping gear arranged in a pyramid?" he asked, reading from his notes. "Yes, sir, in the hollow, about half a mile down from the main trail." "And you said the bones looked old? Civil War era?" I nodded. "Some of them, but there were fresh remains too, and I found a ranger badge from 1954. Rodriguez frowned. "We'll check our records." "Patterson, you said?" "Thomas Patterson. Disappeared on this same ridge 22 years ago." The captain radioed the search teams. Within an hour, they'd located the pyramid in Copper Hollow. The radio chatter was professional, but tense. "Base, this is Team 3. We found the site, confirming multiple human remains, various stages of decomposition. We're going to need the coroner up here. Any sign of our missing people?" "Negative on the hikers, but we found ranger gear, hats, radios, badges. Some of this stuff looks decades old." I was listening to the radio from my truck when the transmission cut to static. Then, silence. Rodriguez tried raising Team 3 on the radio. No response. He sent Team 2 down to check on them. 20 minutes later, they went silent too. By sunset, we'd lost contact with 8 officers in Copper Hollow. "I'm calling this off," Rodriguez told me. "We'll come back tomorrow with more equipment and a bigger team." But I knew tomorrow would be too late. Whatever lived in these mountains was getting stronger. The heat, the isolation, the fear, it was feeding on all of it. I volunteered to stay overnight and maintain radio contact. Rodriguez didn't like it, but he was short on options. He left me with emergency flares and a promise to return at first light. As the sun went down, the temperature finally started to drop, but instead of relief, I felt a growing sense of dread. The thing in the hollow was more active after dark. I could sense it moving around down there, doing things I didn't want to think about. Around midnight, I heard singing. It was coming from multiple directions at once, like a choir spread across the mountain. But the voices were all wrong, too deep, too hollow, like they were coming from the bottom of a well. I recognized the tune. It was an old Cherokee protection song my great-grandfather used to sing. But the words were twisted, changed into something dark and hungry. The singing got louder, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and emergency flares, but I knew they wouldn't help. You can't fight something made of living stone with modern equipment. That's when I remembered my great-grandfather's stories about the Nununui, the stone man. He'd told me the legends when I was young, but I dismissed them as folklore. According to the stories, The stone man was a Cherokee guardian spirit, created to protect the mountains from evil. But something had happened during the Civil War. Soldiers had killed Cherokee families in these same hollows, and their blood had corrupted the guardian, turning it into something twisted and hungry. The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear footsteps. Not the soft padding of human feet, but the grinding crunch of something impossibly heavy walking across granite. I looked toward the main trail and saw it. 12 feet tall, made of living stone and shadow. Its body was rough granite, shot through with veins of red light like molten rock. Where its face should be, there was just a smooth surface with 2 burning holes for eyes. It moved like liquid, flowing over obstacles instead of walking around them. When it stepped on solid rock, I could see its foot sink into the granite like it was soft mud. The creature stopped about 50 yards away and looked directly at me. When our eyes met, I felt something cold and alien touch my mind. It was reading my thoughts, my memories, learning everything about me. Then it spoke, and its voice was the sound of mountains breaking apart. Jacob Thornfield, 3rd generation, Cherokee blood, you belong here. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The creature's will held me in place like invisible chains. Your people made me, it continued, stepping closer. Your people's pain twisted me. Now I am something new, something hungry. It raised one massive hand, and I could see the missing rangers and hikers pressed into its palm like insects in amber. They were still alive, still conscious, their eyes wide with terror. Join them, the stone man said. Become part of the mountain, forever. That's when I remembered the rest of my great-grandfather's story. The stone man could be fought, but only by someone with Cherokee blood who knew the old songs. The real songs, not the twisted versions it had been singing. I found my voice and started singing the protection song the way my great-grandfather had taught me, with the original words and the proper rhythm. The creature stopped moving toward me, its burning eyes flickering like dying coals. The song was working, but I could feel the creature fighting back, trying to corrupt the words in my mouth. It took every bit of strength I had to keep singing the true version. The stone man raised both hands above its head, and I could see all the victims trapped in its body. Rangers, hikers, Civil War soldiers, Cherokee families. Decades of death and pain, all absorbed into its twisted form. You cannot save them, it said. They are part of me now, as you will be. But as I kept singing, cracks appeared in the creature's stone skin. Light leaked out from between the fissures, and I could hear voices. The voices of everyone it had absorbed, crying out for release. The stone man took another step toward me, and that's when I knew the protection song wasn't enough. I needed something stronger. I needed to set them all free. I stopped singing the protection song and started the song of unbinding, the most dangerous Cherokee ritual I knew. My great-grandfather had made me promise never to use it except in the most desperate circumstances. This qualified. The unbinding song wasn't meant to protect. It was meant to release spirits from whatever was holding them. But it was dangerous because it released everything, including things that might be better left bound. The stone man sensed what I was doing and let out a roar that shook the entire mountain. Rocks tumbled down from the ridge above, and I could hear trees cracking in the distance. You don't understand what you're doing, boy, the creature said, its voice now filled with something like fear. I am not the only thing bound to this place. There are older powers, darker things sleeping in the deep caves. But I kept singing. The words felt like fire in my throat, and I could taste copper and sulfur with each note. This song wasn't meant for human voices. It was older than language, older than the Cherokee themselves. The cracks in the creature's body spread wider. Light poured out like liquid sunshine, and I began to see the shapes of people inside the stone. Rangers in their uniforms, hikers with their backpacks, soldiers in Civil War gray, Cherokee families in traditional dress, all of them pressed together in an impossible space, all of them aware and suffering. The stone man raised its fist to crush me, but the song was weakening it. Its movements were slower, less fluid. The burning coals of its eyes were dimming. Release them, I sang. Release them all. Let the dead rest and the living go free. The creature's fist came down, but it passed through me like I wasn't there. The unbinding song had made me temporarily insubstantial, existing between the physical world and the spirit realm. More cracks appeared in the stone man's body. Arms broke off and crumbled to dust. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, and the light behind its eyes went out. But as the creature began to collapse, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. The stone man had been guarding something. Deep beneath the mountain, something much worse was stirring. I could feel it waking up, stretching ancient limbs, preparing to rise. The ground beneath my feet began to crack and split. Steam rose from the fissures, carrying the smell of sulfur and decay. Whatever was down there had been sleeping for thousands of years, and my unbinding song had just rung its alarm clock. The stone man looked at me one last time before its body completely crumbled. "You have no idea what you've done," it said. "I was protecting them. From what comes next." The creature collapsed into a pile of ordinary granite, and all the people it had absorbed tumbled free. Most were unconscious, but alive. Maria, Bill, the 3 missing hikers, and dozens of others from different time periods. But my relief was short-lived. The mountain was shaking harder now, and I could hear something enormous moving deep underground. Something that made the stone man look like a child's toy. I grabbed Maria and Bill, the only ones conscious enough to move, and started helping people away from the cracking ground. We had maybe minutes before whatever was beneath us broke through. "What's happening?" Maria gasped. "I made a mistake," I said. "The stone man wasn't the enemy. It was a guardian. It was keeping something else locked up down there." The ground split open like a broken egg, and something that looked like a massive hand made of molten rock reached up from the depths. The hand was easily 40 feet across, with claws that dripped liquid fire. We ran. All of us who could move, carrying those who couldn't. The mountain was coming apart behind us, and I could hear something climbing up from the depths, something that had been waiting for freedom since before humans walked the earth. I knew there was only one way to stop what I'd unleashed. The unbinding song worked both ways. If I could turn it around, reverse the melody, I might be able to bind the ancient thing back into the earth. But the reversal song required a sacrifice, the singer's life force to power the binding. My great-grandfather had told me that too, in his warnings about the old magic. I could save everyone else, but I wouldn't survive the spell. As we reached the main trail, I made my choice. I told Maria to keep everyone moving toward the parking area, then I turned back toward the mountain. The ancient thing was almost free now. I could see its massive head rising from the crack in the earth, something like a dragon made of living magma, with eyes like collapsed stars. I started singing the binding song, feeling my life drain away with every note. The creature heard me and roared in fury, but it was too late. The spell was already working, pulling it back down into the depths. The last thing I remember was the mountain sealing itself back together, and the terrible silence that followed. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Richmond. They told me I'd been found unconscious at the base of Devil's Backbone, severely dehydrated and suffering from heat exhaustion. The official story was that a flash flood had caused a landslide, trapping several hikers and park personnel in Copper Hollow. Maria and Bill backed up the story. So did the 3 missing hikers. When the investigators asked about the other people we'd rescued, the ones from different time periods, there were no other people, just the 6 of us. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd done. The files from the 1,950 seconds showed that Thomas Patterson had been found and returned to his family. He'd apparently been suffering from amnesia and had lived quietly in a neighboring town for 22 years. Same story for a dozen other missing persons cases going back to the Civil War. The official explanation was that they'd all suffered psychological breaks and had been living as hermits in the deep woods. Heat exhaustion and trauma had triggered their return to civilization. Case closed. I tried to go back to work, but the mountains felt different now. Every time I walked a trail, I could sense things moving just out of sight. The stone man was gone, but other guardians were stirring, waking up to fill the void I'd created. I put in for a transfer to the office in Richmond. Desk duty, filing reports, scheduling maintenance. My supervisors thought I was having a breakdown, but they approved the transfer. After 16 years in the field, I'd earned a quiet retirement. But the mountains don't let you go that easily. I still get reports from Devil's Backbone. Hikers who see rocks moving when no one's looking. Campers who wake up to find their gear arranged in perfect circles. Climbers who hear singing from empty valleys. The Cherokee say that spirits are neither good nor evil, they just are. They exist to maintain balance, to keep the old agreements between the world of the living and the world of the dead. I broke one of those agreements, when I unbound the stone man. I saved the people it had trapped, but I also destroyed something that had been protecting the mountain for centuries. Now new guardians are taking its place. Smaller ones, hungrier ones, less concerned with maintaining the old balances. Last week, a family of 4 went missing from the Backbone Trail. They found the campsite empty, with all the gear arranged in a spiral pattern around a cold fire ring. No footprints leading away from the site. The official search lasted 3 days. No sign of the missing family. Case transferred to the state police as a probable abduction. But I know better. I know what's happening up there. The mountain is learning new rules. And sometimes, late at night in my Richmond apartment, I can still hear singing from the direction of Devil's Backbone. The voices of the new guardians, teaching themselves the songs of binding and unbinding, practicing for when the next sacrifice comes wandering up their trails. I've thought about going back, about trying to set things right. But I made my choice that night on the ridge. I chose to save the people who were trapped, knowing it would unleash something else. I have to live with that choice. The mountain will have to live with it too. If you're planning to hike the Blue Ridge Parkway, especially the Devil's Backbone section, do yourself a favor. Go somewhere else. Find a different mountain, a different trail, a different adventure. Some places are better left alone. And some guardians, no matter how terrible they might seem, are there for a reason. Trust me on this one. I learned it the hard way. My name is Jacob Thornfield, and I used to be a park ranger. Now I'm just a man who knows too much about the things that live in the spaces between the rocks, waiting for the next group of hikers to arrange their gear in perfect circles and disappear into the hungry darkness of the mountain. The official records will tell you that Devil's Backbone is safe for hiking. The Park Service has never recorded a single supernatural incident in the area. But they're wrong. The mountain remembers everything, and it's still learning how to hunt. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years. I've seen a lot of things in the mountains that would make most people pack up and head back to the city. Bears, lost hikers, rock slides that come out of nowhere. But what happened on Old Rag Mountain that Mother's Day weekend in 1984 changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I'm 38 years old, been working Shenandoah National Park since I was 26. My parents came here from Spain when I was little, looking for a better life. They found work in the valleys, but I always felt drawn to the mountains. Something about the height, the clean air, the way you could see for miles from the peaks, it felt like freedom. I specialize in search and rescue, technical climbing, medical emergencies, finding people who've gotten themselves into trouble where helicopters can't reach. I'm certified as an EMT, and I've pulled more than 200 people off these mountains alive. It's good work. Important work. 3 years ago, I lost my daughter Carmen to leukemia. She was only 8. After that, I threw myself into the job even harder. Every person I saved felt like maybe I was making up for the one I couldn't save. My ex-husband said I was running away from life, hiding in the mountains. Maybe he was right, but the mountains never lied to you. They were dangerous, sure, but honest about it. That Friday morning started normal enough. Weather Service was calling for storms over the weekend, which meant we'd probably have some rescue calls. People don't always listen when you tell them storms in the mountains are different from storms in the city. The wind gets channeled between the peaks, turns nasty fast. Lightning up there doesn't fool around. I was checking my gear when the call came in. Family of 5 overdue on Old Rag, the Hendersons. Mom, dad, 3 kids aged 6, 10, and 14. They'd planned to camp at the summit for Mother's Day weekend. Nice family tradition, except they should have checked the weather first. Tom Rodriguez, my backup ranger, looked worried when he handed me the report. Radio went dead yesterday, around 6 p.m., he said. Last transmission said they were setting up camp near the summit. Old Rag is a tough climb. 3,000 feet straight up, with granite faces that'll kill you if you're not careful. But it's popular because the view from the top makes you feel like you're standing on top of the world. On a clear day, you can see all the way to Washington, D.C. I loaded my pack with the usual gear, ropes, medical supplies, emergency radio, climbing hardware, added some extra food and water in case the family was just stuck and waiting out the weather. The storm was supposed to hit that afternoon, so I wanted to get up there and get them down before it arrived. The hike starts easy enough, through oak and pine forest that smells like earth and growing things. But as you climb higher, the trees get smaller and the rocks get bigger. By the time you reach the granite slabs near the summit, you're basically rock climbing with a backpack on. About halfway up, I noticed something wrong. The forest was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing, just silence and the sound of my boots on the trail. In 12 years, I'd never heard the mountains this quiet during the day. It made the hair on my neck stand up. The wind started picking up around noon, earlier than the forecast predicted. Dark clouds were piling up against the western peaks like they were in a hurry to get somewhere. The air had that electric feeling you get before a bad storm, like everything was holding its breath. I should have turned back then, should have trusted my instincts, but somewhere up there was a family with 3 kids, and I'd never left anyone on the mountain who needed help. That was my first mistake. I found their gear before I found them. The Henderson family's climbing equipment was scattered across a grove of tall pines about 200 yards below the summit. But it wasn't just scattered. It was embedded. Carabiners driven into tree trunks like nails. Rope threaded through branches 40 feet off the ground. A camping stove hanging from a limb so high I'd need technical gear just to retrieve it. It looked like their stuff had been thrown by a tornado. Except there hadn't been any tornadoes. Not yet. I keyed my radio. "Tom, this is Maria. You copy?" Static. Then something weird, voices speaking in what sounded like 1,950 seconds, radio code, emergency at Sector 7. Civilian casualties reported. The transmission faded in and out like it was coming from very far away. I tried again. "Base, this is Ranger Santos on Old Rag." Radio check. More static than nothing. The clouds were getting thicker, but I shouldn't have been losing signal yet. My equipment was good, and I was high enough to reach the base station. I kept climbing toward the summit, following what was left of the trail. The granite slabs here are smooth and steep, worn down by millions of years of weather. You have to use your hands as much as your feet, finding tiny cracks and ledges to hold on to. That's when I saw the impressions. Pressed into a patch of soft mud between 2 rock faces were marks I'd never seen before. They looked like wing prints, huge ones, maybe 20 feet from tip to tip, but mixed in with them were smaller prints, human handprints. Adult-sized, pressed deep into the mud like someone had been pushed down hard. I knelt down to get a better look. The wing marks were fresh, maybe a day old. The mud was still soft in the center where something heavy had pressed down. But the handprints bothered me more. They were too deep. Like whoever made them had been pressed into the ground with enormous force. A sound echoed off the rocks above me, high-pitched and musical, almost like a child laughing, but it came from empty air, bouncing between the granite faces until I couldn't tell where it started. "Hello?" I called out. "Henderson family? Can you hear me?" The laughter came again, closer this time. It sounded like a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. But there was something wrong with it. It went on too long, had too many notes that didn't quite sound human. I climbed faster, my heart starting to pound. The summit of Old Rag is mostly bare granite, shaped like a giant bowl. You can see in all directions, which usually makes you feel on top of the world. But now the thick clouds made it feel like I was climbing into a gray ceiling that could fall on me any second. I reached the top and stopped cold. There was a nest. It sat in the center of the summit, built against the highest point of rock. But it wasn't made of sticks and leaves like a normal bird's nest. It was made of human things. Camping gear woven together with climbing rope, sleeping bags arranged in a circle, a camp stove sitting in the middle like an altar, and around the edge, arranged in a careful pattern, were family photos. Dozens of them, all showing the same thing. Parents with children, smiling at cameras. Some of the pictures were old, the kind with scalloped edges from decades ago. Others looked recent, with bright colors and sharp focus. None of them showed the Henderson family. I approached slowly, my hand reaching for the radio, even though I knew it wouldn't work. The nest was bigger than it had looked from a distance, maybe 10 feet across. Up close, I could see it was built with incredible precision. Every rope was tied with perfect knots. Every piece of gear was positioned exactly where it would be most stable. Something moved inside the nest. I froze, holding my breath. A small figure sat up from behind the camp stove, rubbing its eyes like it had just woken up. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, wearing a pink jacket and muddy hiking boots. "Emma, I called softly. Emma Henderson, the youngest daughter according to the missing persons report. The girl looked at me with eyes that seemed too old for her face. She smiled, showing teeth that were perfectly white and straight. The angel mother said you'd come, she said in a voice like wind chimes. She said you'd be perfect. Where are your parents, sweetheart? Where's your family? Emma pointed up at the sky, even though all I could see were thick gray clouds. They went to the sky home. The angel mother took them to be safe. I'm here to help you get down from the mountain, I said, stepping closer. There's a big storm coming. That's when Emma stood up, and I saw what was behind her in the nest. 4 backpacks, 2 adult-sized, 2 for children. All of them arranged in a neat row, like they were waiting for their owners to come back. But the owners weren't coming back, and somehow I knew it even before Emma spoke again. She's coming back soon, the little girl said, still smiling that too perfect smile. She wants to meet you. She says you understand about losing children. The wind picked up, howling between the granite peaks. In the distance, thunder rumbled like something enormous was walking across the sky, and Emma Henderson began to speak in her mother's voice. Maria, honey, you need to listen to me. The words came out of 6-year-old Emma's mouth, but the voice belonged to a grown woman, calm, patient, with a slight southern accent. I know this looks scary, but she's not going to hurt you. She just wants to help. I stumbled backward, my climbing gear clattering. This was impossible. Children don't change voices like that. People don't speak with other people's voices. Emma, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Emma, look at me. What's your name? The little girl tilted her head, and when she spoke again, it was in a man's voice. Deep, rough around the edges. She's not Emma anymore, Ranger. She's something better now. We all are. Thunder crashed overhead, much closer than before. The storm was moving in fast, bringing wind that screamed between the rocks. I needed to get this child off the mountain, but nothing about this situation made sense. I keyed my radio again, hoping for any kind of signal. Instead, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Emma's real voice, crying and scared, coming through the static. Mommy? Daddy? Where are you? It's dark and I can't find you, and there's something in the trees, and it has big wings, and the transmission cut off. I looked at the little girl standing in front of me. She was still smiling, but now she spoke in yet another voice. A teenage boy, scared and confused. She took us up high, the voice said through Emma's mouth. Way up high where the air is thin and you can see everything. Mom tried to fight, but you can't fight something with wings that big. Dad tried to grab us, but she was so strong. So incredibly strong. Stop it, I whispered. Stop doing that. Emma's expression changed. For just a moment, I saw the real 6-year-old underneath. Terrified, confused, desperate to go home. Then something else took control again. You lost a daughter too. This time it was a woman's voice, but not Emma's mother. Someone else entirely. Someone with a Spanish accent like my own mother's. Carmen, wasn't it? 8 years old when the cancer took her? I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. No one here should know about Carmen. No one except... How do you know that name? Emma smiled wider, showing too many teeth. She knows everything about mothers who've lost children. She collects us, she helps us. The wind was getting stronger, bringing the first drops of rain. Lightning flashed somewhere behind the clouds, turning everything white for a split second. In that flash, I saw something moving on the granite face above us. Something with wings. I grabbed Emma's hand. It was cold as stone. We need to get off this mountain right now. But Emma pulled away with strength that no 6-year-old should have. You can't leave. She's almost here. She wants to show you something wonderful. The thing I'd glimpsed moved again, circling above us in the storm clouds. It was big, much bigger than any bird, and it was descending. I pulled out my emergency flare gun, not sure what I planned to do with it. Emma watched me with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. She won't hurt you, the child said in her mother's voice again. She only hurts the ones who try to take her children away. I'm not taking anyone away. I'm trying to help. That's what they all say. Now it was Emma's father speaking through her. Right before they realize what she really is. The rain started falling harder, turning the granite slabs slippery and dangerous. Lightning flashed again, and this time I saw it clearly. 8 feet tall, with wings that stretched 20 feet from tip to tip, shaped like a woman but wrong in every way that mattered. It moved through the air without making a sound, circling us like a hawk, deciding when to strike. Emma clapped her hands together like she was watching a wonderful show. "Isn't she beautiful?" the little girl asked in a voice I didn't recognize. Old, creaky, like someone who'd been dead for a long time. She's been waiting so long for another mother to understand. The creature landed on the rocks above us with no sound at all. Up close, it was even more wrong than from a distance. The body was definitely female, but stretched and elongated like someone had pulled a person too tall. The wings weren't feathered like a bird's. They were more like a bat's, dark membrane stretched between elongated finger bones. But the worst part was the face. It looked human at first glance, almost beautiful, but the eyes glowed red in the dim light, and when it opened its mouth, I saw rows of teeth that belonged in a shark, not a woman. "Maria Santos," it said in a voice like wind through empty houses. "I've been waiting for you." Emma giggled and ran toward the creature, who scooped her up in arms that ended in claws. The little girl snuggled against that impossible chest, like she was being held by her real mother. "You understand loss?" the creature continued, stroking Emma's hair with one clawed hand. "You know what it's like to have a child taken from you. I can fix that. I can give you all the children you want." Lightning crashed directly overhead, so close I felt the electricity in the air. In the flash, I saw bones scattered around the base of the nest. Small bones, child-sized. "What did you do to her family?" I asked, raising the flare gun. The creature smiled, showing all those terrible teeth. "I gave them what every family wants. I made them eternal. They're all here, in her voice, in her memory. They'll never leave her again." Emma spoke up in her own voice, but the words were all wrong. "She's my new mommy. She says she'll never let me go. She says we'll be together forever and ever and ever." The creature's eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "Join us, Maria. Become the mother you were meant to be. Help me care for all the lost children." "Let the girl go," I said, trying to keep the flare gun steady despite my shaking hands. "But she doesn't want to go," the creature purred. "Do you, little one?" Emma shook her head, cuddling closer to those impossible arms. "I want to stay with the angel mother. She makes the scary voices go away." That's when I realized the truth. The voices Emma had been speaking with, they weren't just her dead family. They were all the other children this thing had taken over the years. All of them trapped inside Emma's head, speaking through her mouth, unable to rest. The creature spread its wings wide, preparing to take off with Emma in its arms. Rain poured down harder, making everything slippery and dangerous. "Last chance, Maria," it said. "Come with us willingly, and I'll let you keep your memories of Carmen. Fight me, and I'll take those too." I thought about my daughter, about her laugh, her smile, the way she used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her stories. Then I thought about Emma Henderson, 6 years old and trapped in a nightmare she couldn't understand. I pulled the trigger. The flare hit the creature square in the chest, exploding in a burst of red fire and chemical smoke. It shrieked, a sound like metal tearing and wind screaming, and dropped Emma onto the granite. The little girl hit hard, crying out in pain. Real pain, in her own voice. For the first time since I'd found her, she sounded like an actual 6-year-old child. The creature's wing membrane was burning where the flare had struck, holes melting through the thin skin. It stumbled backward, those red eyes blazing with fury instead of false warmth. "You can't hurt her," Emma screamed. But now she was speaking in her dead mother's voice again. "She's all we have left." I scooped up the little girl, surprised by how light she felt. Too light, like she was mostly hollow inside. She fought against me, but weakly, like someone fighting in their sleep. "We're getting off this mountain," I said, backing toward the trail that led down from the summit. The creature recovered faster than I'd hoped. The holes in its wings were already starting to close, the burned edges healing like they were made of liquid instead of flesh. It launched itself into the air again, circling us in the rain and lightning. "You don't understand," it called down to us. "She chose to stay. They all chose to stay. I only give them what they want most, a mother who will never leave them." Emma went limp in my arms, speaking now in the voice of her teenage brother. "She's right, you know. Being alone is worse than this. At least here we're all together." I started down the trail, moving as fast as I dared on the slippery rocks. The creature followed overhead, sometimes visible in the lightning flashes, sometimes just a shadow moving through the storm clouds. Think about Carmen, it called to me, its voice somehow carrying over the wind and thunder. She died alone, didn't she? In a hospital bed while you were home sleeping? You weren't there when she needed you most. Shut up, I whispered, but the words hit like physical blows. Because it was true. I hadn't been there. I'd gone home to shower and change clothes, thinking I had more time. Carmen died while I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot, working up the courage to go back inside. I can bring her back, the creature continued. Not like this broken little shell you're carrying. Really back, young and healthy and perfect. All you have to do is let me help you. Emma stirred in my arms, looking up at me with eyes that now seemed to hold decades of sadness. She brought back my mommy and daddy and brother, she said in her own voice. They live inside me now. We're never apart. The trail down from Old Rag is treacherous, even in good weather. In a storm, with rain making every rock surface slick and lightning turning the world into a strobe light, it was nearly suicidal. But I kept moving, Emma's weight shifting in my arms as different voices took control of her small body. Behind us, the creature had gone silent. That worried me more than the taunting had. I couldn't see it anymore, couldn't hear the massive wings cutting through the air. In the storm, that thing could be anywhere. I was halfway down the granite face when it struck. Claws raked across my back, shredding my pack and jacket. I stumbled, nearly dropping Emma, catching myself against a rock face with my free hand. The creature landed on the narrow trail ahead of us, blocking our path. Give her back, it hissed. She belongs with her family. Her family is dead, I said, pulling out my backup flare. You killed them. I freed them from the pain of separation. Now they're all together, forever. Isn't that what every family wants? Emma spoke up in what I now realized was her father's voice. She's right, Ranger. Death isn't the worst thing that can happen to a family. Being apart is worse. The creature stepped closer, its red eyes fixed on mine. This close, I could see that its face was a horrible mixture of human and something else. Beautiful from a distance, but wrong in every detail when you looked closely. The skin was too smooth, like plastic. The smile was too wide. The eyes reflected light like an animal's. You know I'm right, it said softly. Your daughter called for you when she died, called for her mommy, but you weren't there, were you? I raised the flare gun, but my hand was shaking. Not from fear, from grief, because every word was true. Let me fix that, the creature whispered. Let me give you a family that will never leave you. Children who will never grow up, never get sick, never die. All you have to do is say, yes. For a moment, I almost did. The loneliness since Carmen's death had been like a physical weight, crushing me a little more every day. The idea of having her back, of having a family again, was almost irresistible. Then Emma spoke in her own voice, small and scared and heartbreakingly young. Please, she whispered. I want to go home. I want my real mommy. I looked down at this little girl I barely knew and saw Carmen's face for just a moment. Not because they looked alike, but because they were both 6 years old and afraid and needing someone to protect them. I'd failed my daughter. I wouldn't fail Emma. I fired the flare directly into the creature's face. It screamed and stumbled backward, its hands clawing at burning eyes. I didn't wait to see how much damage I'd done. I grabbed Emma and ran down the trail as fast as I dared, rocks sliding under my feet, rain making everything a blur. Behind us, the creature's screams turned into something else, wings beating against the air. It was following us, blind but not helpless. The trail switched back down the mountain face, each turn bringing us closer to the tree line. If I could reach the forest, maybe we'd have cover. Maybe I could lose it in the darkness between the trees. Emma was speaking in multiple voices now, all of them pleading with me to go back. Her mother begging me to reconsider, her father promising it would be better, her brother saying he missed being alive but this was close enough. They're not really in there, I said, more to myself than to her. You're just remembering them. Does it matter? Emma asked in her grandmother's voice, a woman I'd never met. If the memory is perfect, if it never fades, if they're always with you, does it matter if they're real? A tree exploded next to us as the creature crashed into it, still following by sound and scent despite its damaged eyes. Splinters of wood flew like shrapnel, and I felt several pieces cut into my arms and face. We were close to the tree line now. I could see the dark shapes of pines ahead, their branches whipping in the wind. Safety was maybe 50 yards away. That's when I slipped. The rock face was slick with rain, and my boots skidded on a loose stone. Emma and I went down hard, sliding toward the edge of the trail where it dropped off into a 100-foot fall. I managed to catch hold of a tree root with one hand. Emma clutched against my chest with the other. We dangled there in the rain, my shoulders screaming with pain from our combined weight. Above us, the creature landed on the trail. Its eyes were healing, the burned flesh knitting itself back together. In a few minutes, it would be able to see again. "End of the line," it said, walking slowly to the edge where we hung. "Give me the child, and I'll pull you back up. Try to keep her, and you'll both fall. Your choice, Maria." I looked down at Emma. She was speaking in her mother's voice again, but softer now, sadder. "Let me go," she said. "I'm not really alive anymore anyway. I haven't been since she took my family. At least this way you can live." "No," I said. "I'm not letting go of you." "Why not?" Emma asked in her own voice. "You let go of Carmen." The words hit harder than the creature's claws had. Because they were true. I had let go of Carmen. I'd given up fighting the cancer, accepted the doctor's prognosis, started planning her funeral while she was still alive. I'd let go long before she died. "This is different," I said. "How?" the creature asked from above us. "How is this different from watching your daughter die?" I thought about it as my grip on the tree root started to slip. How was this different? Both Emma and Carmen were lost. Both were beyond my power to truly save. Both would be better off if I just accepted reality and moved on. But there was one difference. This time, I could choose not to give up. "Because this time," I said, shifting my grip and starting to swing Emma toward a ledge I could barely see in the storm, "I'm not letting go." The ledge held. Barely. Emma and I crawled along it in the rain until we found a crack in the rock face wide enough to shelter in. Above us, the creature screamed its frustration into the storm, but couldn't reach us without risking a fall that might actually hurt it. We waited there for 3 hours while the storm passed. Emma spoke in different voices the whole time, but more quietly now, like her family was whispering instead of shouting. Gradually, as we got farther from the summit, the other voices faded until only her own remained. "I can't remember what my mommy looked like," she said as the rain finally stopped. "Not really, just bits and pieces." "That's okay," I said. "That's normal. The angel mother said she'd keep the memories perfect forever, but they hurt so much." "Good memories are supposed to hurt sometimes," I told her. "That's how you know they meant something." When the rescue helicopter finally reached us the next morning, Emma Henderson was just a traumatized 6-year-old who remembered very little about what had happened to her family. The official report said they'd been struck by lightning while camping on the summit. Emma's trauma amnesia explained why she couldn't remember the details. I never told anyone about the creature. Who would believe it? Instead, I requested a transfer to a different park, somewhere with lower mountains and fewer missing persons cases. But every Mother's Day since 1984, I checked the incident reports from Shenandoah. And every Mother's Day, another family goes missing on Old Rag Mountain. Usually during storms. Always families with children. The bodies are found eventually, when they're found at all. Lightning strike victims, according to the official reports. Emma Henderson grew up and moved away from Virginia. She became a teacher, never had children of her own. We exchange Christmas cards sometimes. She signs them with her own name only, and I'm grateful for that. I learned something important on Old Rag Mountain that weekend. Grief isn't something you solve or fix or get over. It's something you carry. And sometimes the weight of it makes you think that any alternative, even a horrible one, would be better than what you're feeling. But grief is also love with nowhere to go. The creature on the mountain offered to take that love and twist it into something monstrous. A perfect family that would never leave, never change, never grow up or grow old or make their own choices. I think that's the real horror, not the creature itself, but how tempting its offer was. How close I came to saying yes. Sometimes, on Mother's Day, I drive back to the Shenandoah Valley. Not to Old Rag, I've never set foot on that trail again, but to the smaller mountains nearby, where I can look up at the peaks and remember. Carmen would be 33 now if she'd lived. She might have had children of her own. She definitely would have changed in ways I can't imagine, become a person I never got to meet. The creature on Old Rag would have frozen her at 8 years old forever, perfect and unchanging and eternally, horribly mine. I'm glad I chose the grief instead. But on windy nights, especially in May, I sometimes hear children's laughter carried on the storm winds. Too many voices laughing together, like a family reunion that never ends. And I wonder how many mothers over the years have heard that sound and followed it up the mountain, looking for the children they lost. The Park Service posts warnings now during storm season. Hikers advised to avoid Old Rag Summit during severe weather conditions. They put up signs about lightning, safety, and emergency preparedness. They don't mention the other reason to stay away. But sometimes I think they should. Because somewhere up there, in a nest made of camping gear and family photos, something is still waiting, still collecting mothers who understand loss, still offering a family that will never leave. And Mother's Day comes every year, bringing storms and grieving women and children who laugh too long in voices that carry on the wind. I just hope the next ranger who finds them is stronger than I was, or maybe luckier, or maybe just angry enough to choose the right kind of pain. My name is Robert Morrison, but everyone calls me Buck. I've been a park ranger for 15 years now, working these Tennessee mountains since I was 26. Most folks think being a ranger means helping lost hikers and putting out campfires. They don't know about the other stuff. The illegal stills hidden deep in the hollows, the families who've been making moonshine since before Prohibition ended, the violence that comes when money and tradition mix with mountain pride. I was born right here in Cherokee National Forest, in a little cabin that's long gone now. My daddy made moonshine, just like his daddy before him. The Morrison family has been working these hills for over 100 years. When I put on this ranger uniform, some folks called me a traitor, said I was turning my back on family tradition. Maybe they were right, but I'd seen what that life could do to a man. September 1979 was hotter than hell. We hadn't seen rain in 6 weeks, and the temperature hit 105 degrees most days. The leaves were already turning brown and falling off the trees, even though it wasn't October yet. Everything felt wrong that month. The animals were acting strange, moving around at weird times. Birds flying in circles. Deer coming down from the high country way too early. I remember the morning it all started. I was sitting in my truck outside the ranger station in Tellico Plains, drinking coffee and reading reports. My supervisor, Jim Hawkins, came over and knocked on my window. "Buck, we got something for you," he said. "Looks like there's a big operation up in Moonshine Hollow, bigger than anything we've seen in years." Moonshine Hollow. Even the name made my stomach tight. That place had history, and not the good kind. During Prohibition, it was one of the biggest moonshine operations in the state. Federal agents raided it in 1923, and 3 people died in the shooting. After that, nobody went up there much. The spring water was good, real good, but something about that hollow felt cursed. "How big we talking?" I asked. "Big enough that we're getting complaints from folks 20 miles away. They say they can smell it on the wind. Sweet smell, like corn mash fermenting." I knew that smell, grew up with it. When someone's running a still that big, they're not just making shine for the family, they're running a business. And business like that brings trouble. "You want me to go up there alone? Take Carl with you. He knows the area pretty good." Carl Jenkins was a new guy, only been with the service about 2 years. Good kid, but green as grass. He grew up in Nashville, didn't know these mountains like I did. Didn't understand that some places in these hills had their own rules. We loaded up the truck with our gear, standard stuff, radios, first aid kit, evidence bags. I also brought my .38 revolver and made sure Carl had his. You never know what you're going to find when you bust up a still operation. Some of these mountain families would shoot first and ask questions later. The drive up to Moonshine Hollow took about an hour. The dirt road was rough and narrow, winding through thick woods. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Usually these mountains are full of sounds, birds calling, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing, but that day it was silent, dead silent. "You notice how quiet it is?" Carl asked. "Yeah, I notice. Where are all the animals?" That was a good question. In 15 years of ranger work, I'd never seen the woods so empty. No deer tracks in the mud, no bird droppings on the rocks. Even the bugs seemed to have cleared out. We reached the end of the road and parked the truck. From here, we'd have to hike about a mile to reach the hollow. I checked my radio and tried to raise the station. Static, nothing but static. That's weird, I said, turning the dial. More static, and then something that made my blood run cold. Music. Old-timey banjo music, like something from the 1920 seconds. Scratchy and faint, but definitely there. Where's that coming from? Carl asked. I switched off the radio. Probably just interference from the mountains. But I didn't believe that, and from the look on Carl's face, neither did he. We started hiking. The trail was overgrown, but still visible. My grandfather had walked this same path back when he was running shine up here. He used to tell stories about the hollow, about how the spring water there was so pure it could make the smoothest whiskey in Tennessee. He also told stories about other things, strange things that lived in these mountains, things that didn't like strangers. Just old mountain superstitions, I told myself. But walking through those silent woods, I was starting to wonder. The heat was awful, even under the trees. Our shirts were soaked with sweat before we'd gone half a mile. The air felt thick and heavy, like breathing through wet cloth. And underneath the smell of hot pine needles and dry earth, there was something else. Something sweet and sick, like fruit rotting in the sun. You smell that? Carl asked. Yeah, could be the still. When they're running a big operation, the smell can carry for miles. But this smell was different from any moonshine operation I'd ever busted. Stronger, more chemical. It reminded me of something, but I couldn't place what. We crested a small ridge and looked down into Moonshine Hollow. What we saw there stopped us dead in our tracks. The still was there, all right, or what was left of it. The copper equipment was scattered all over the hollow, twisted and bent like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. The furnace was cold and dark. Mason jars were smashed to pieces, their contents soaking into the ground. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was how quiet it was, how wrong everything felt, and the footprints in the mud around the destroyed still. They were huge, at least 18 inches long, and they definitely weren't human. We stood on that ridge for a long minute, just staring. I'd busted up maybe 20 illegal stills in my time as a ranger. Never seen destruction like this. The copper coils weren't just broken, they were twisted into knots, like someone had wrung them out like wet rags. The big fermentation barrels were crushed flat. One of them looked like it had been stepped on by something with enormous feet. Jesus Christ, Buck, Carl whispered. What happened here? I was wondering the same thing. We made our way down into the hollow, being careful where we stepped. The ground around the spring was torn up, covered with those massive footprints. I knelt down next to one and tried to make sense of it. The print was deep, maybe 3 inches into the mud. Whatever made it was heavy. Real heavy. The shape was almost like a human foot, but bigger and wider. There were 5 toes, each one ending in what looked like a claw mark. Could be a bear, Carl said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. Bears don't walk on 2 feet, I said, and they don't destroy moonshine equipment. I stood up and looked around the hollow. The spring was still flowing, clear and cold like always, but the water had a strange shimmer to it, like oil floating on the surface. And the smell was stronger here. That sweet, chemical smell that made my stomach turn. We should take some photos, I said. Document everything. Carl pulled out the camera and started taking pictures. I walked over to examine the still more closely. The copper was good quality, probably cost whoever built this operation a few $1,000s. Now it was ruined, but not just ruined, destroyed with what looked like incredible force. I found something else that made my skin crawl. Claw marks on the oak trees around the hollow, deep gouges in the bark, about 8 feet off the ground. Whatever made those marks was tall, very tall. Buck, you need to see this, Carl called. He was standing by the spring, holding something in his hand. When I got closer, I saw it was a piece of cloth. Denim, like from a pair of work pants. It was torn and stained with something dark. There's more over here, he said, pointing to the base of a large rock. Looks like someone lost a fight. There were definitely signs of a struggle. Scuffed earth, broken branches, more scraps of clothing, and something else. Dark stains on the rocks that could have been blood. Maybe the still operators ran into some competition, I suggested. You know how these mountain families can get territorial. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. I'd grown up around these people. I knew their methods. When mountain folks had a dispute over territory, they settled it with shotguns and hunting rifles. Clean and quick. This looked like something else entirely. The afternoon was getting later. and the shadows in the hollow were growing longer. We needed to finish our investigation and get out before dark. These mountains were dangerous enough in daylight. "Let's check that cave over there," I said, pointing to a dark opening in the rock face on the far side of the hollow. Sometimes they store the finished product in caves to keep it cool. We made our way over to the cave entrance. It was bigger than I'd expected, maybe 10 feet wide and 8 feet tall. Cool air flowed out of the opening, carrying that same strange chemical smell. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it inside. The cave went back about 30 feet, then opened up into a larger chamber, and that's where we found them. Skeletons, human skeletons, lots of them. Some were old, really old. The bones were yellow and brittle, the clothing rotted away to nothing. But others looked more recent. I could still see scraps of cloth, belt buckles, even some old coins scattered around. "My God," Carl breathed. "How many people died up here?" I counted at least a dozen skulls, maybe more. Some of the skeletons were arranged almost like they'd been placed there deliberately. Others were scattered around like they'd been dragged. "Could be from the raid in 23, I said. "Federal agents and moonshiners killed each other. Maybe they buried the bodies up here." But I was starting to get a bad feeling. A real bad feeling. Because some of those bones didn't look like they'd died from gunshot wounds. They looked like they'd been chewed. We spent another hour documenting the cave, taking photos and notes. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound echoed strangely in the hollow. Finally, the sun started setting behind the ridge. "Time to go. We'll come back tomorrow with a bigger team," I told Carl. "Get the county sheriff involved, maybe the state police. This is bigger than just a moonshine bust." We hiked back to the truck as fast as we could without running. The woods were still unnaturally quiet, but now there was something else. A feeling of presence, like something large was moving through the trees just out of sight, keeping pace with us. I tried the radio again when we reached the truck. Still nothing but static and that strange banjo music. The truck engine turned over on the first try, and I'd never been so happy to hear a motor running. We drove out of there as the last light faded from the sky. In the rearview mirror, I thought I saw something large moving between the trees, something that walked on two legs but was definitely not human. "Did you see that?" I asked Carl. He was looking back too, his face pale in the dashboard light. "See what?" "Never mind," I said, but I pressed harder on the gas pedal. We made it back to the ranger station just as full darkness fell. I filed our report and locked the evidence in the safe. The photos would have to be developed, the cloth samples sent to the lab. Standard procedure. But there was nothing standard about what we'd found up there. That night, I went home to my little cabin outside town and tried to make sense of it all. I sat on my porch with a beer and thought about those footprints, those claw marks, those chewed bones. My grandfather's stories came back to me. Stories about things that lived in the deep mountains. Things that didn't like strangers coming around. Things that protected the old places from outsiders. Just superstition, I told myself. But I made sure my Dio 38 was loaded before I went to bed. And I dreamed about something large and hairy watching me from the tree line. Something with glowing green eyes and breath that smelled like death and chemicals. In the dream, it was getting closer. The next morning, I couldn't reach Carl on the radio. I tried his home phone, his truck radio, even called his landlady. Nothing. Carl Jenkins had vanished like smoke. "Maybe his radio's busted," Jim Hawkins said. But Carl's truck wasn't at his apartment, and his landlady said he never came home. "I'm going to look for him," I said. I drove back up to Moonshine Hollow with a sick feeling in my gut. The silence in the woods was even worse than before. Not a bird, not a squirrel, not even a bug. I found Carl's truck at the end of the road, driver's door hanging open. His radio was dead. His gun was still in its holster on the seat. Whatever happened to Carl, he hadn't seen it coming. The smell was stronger today. That sweet, chemical stench that made my nose burn. It seemed to be coming from the spring itself. In the hollow, there were new footprints. Fresh ones, made sometime during the night. They led to the cave where we'd found all those skeletons. "Carl," I called. My voice echoed and died. No answer. I drew my 38 and entered the cave. The skeletons were still there, but there was something new. Carl's ranger hat was lying next to one of the skull clusters, and beside it, fresh drag marks in the dirt. The drag marks led to a narrow tunnel I hadn't noticed before. It opened into another chamber, a bigger one. That's where I found Carl, or what was left of him. I won't describe what I saw, can't describe it, but whatever killed Carl wasn't human, and it wasn't finished with him when he died. I stumbled out and vomited in the bushes. My hands shook as I worked my radio. "Jim, this is Buck. I found Carl. He's dead. Something killed him, something big. I'm sending the sheriff. Stay put." But I wasn't staying put. I started back toward the truck, moving fast. Halfway up the trail, I heard it, breathing. Slow, heavy breathing that sounded wet and labored, like someone with fluid in their lungs. It was coming from the trees, maybe 50 yards away. I stopped. The breathing stopped too. I started walking. The breathing resumed, keeping pace. Whatever was out there was following me. "Jim, there's something in the woods with me, something big. I can hear it breathing. Get to your truck. Get out of there now." The breathing got closer. I could smell it, that chemical stench mixed with wet fur and rotting meat. I reached the ridge and looked back. That's when I saw it. Standing at the tree line, maybe 100 yards away. 10 feet tall, covered in greenish-brown hair, built like a man but wider, heavier. Its eyes glowed with a sick, yellow-green light. It was watching me. We stared at each other for 10 seconds. Then it stepped back into the trees and vanished. I made it to my truck and drove out of those mountains like the devil was chasing me. When I got back, Jim poured me coffee with something stronger in it. "Tell me what happened." So I told him, all of it. When I finished, Jim was quiet. "You sure about what you saw?" "I'm sure. Because what you're describing sounds like a horror movie. I know how it sounds, but I know what I saw." The sheriff arrived with deputies and a wildlife officer. They recovered Carl's body and came back looking shaken. "Biggest damn bear tracks I ever saw," the sheriff said. "Poor kid never had a chance." Bear tracks, that's what they called them. But I knew better. That night, I sat on my porch with my .38 and a bottle of whiskey. Around midnight, the wind carried a familiar smell across the valley. Sweet, chemical, rotten. It was coming closer. For 3 days, I stayed away from Moonshine Hollow. Jim gave me desk duty, said I needed time to process what happened. On the 4th night, it came for me. I was on my porch when I heard something moving in the woods behind my cabin. Big and heavy, breaking branches. The smell hit me immediately. That sick, chemical stench. "I know you're out there," I called. "What do you want?" The sound stopped. Then I heard that wet, labored breathing, maybe 30 yards away. "You killed my partner. Why?" A low rumble came from the woods. Not quite a growl, not quite a voice. But there was intelligence in it. "You're protecting something up there, the hollow. That's your territory, isn't it?" Another rumble, louder this time, angry. That's when it stepped into the light. 10 feet tall, just like I remembered. But up close, I realized it was wrong. Its fur had a greenish tint, like it was contaminated. Its eyes glowed brighter than any animal's should. Its breath came out in visible green vapor that made my lungs burn. And its hands, God, its hands were huge, with claws like broken glass. It opened its mouth and breathed at me. The green vapor hit like poison. My lungs felt like they were on fire. The world started spinning, and I saw things that weren't there. Carl's face, twisted in pain. My grandfather, shaking his head in disappointment. I fell to my knees, gasping. This was how Carl died, not torn apart, but poisoned by this thing's breath. But I had something Carl didn't have. My grandfather's stories. I knew what this thing was. It was a guardian, a protector of the old places. The chemical contamination from decades of moonshine operations had changed it, made it toxic, but it was still following its ancient purpose. With my last bit of consciousness, I rolled toward my cabin. My hand found the bottle of moonshine I kept on the porch. 180 proof, the real stuff. The creature followed, breathing out more poison vapor. I pulled out my lighter and touched flame to the bottle mouth. Moonshine burns hot and fast. The bottle became a torch. I threw it at the creature's chest. The alcohol splashed and caught fire immediately. The thing screamed like a steam engine exploding. It stumbled backward, beating at the flames. For a moment, I thought I'd killed it. But the fire went out quickly, and the creature was still standing, hurt but not defeated. Its eyes were brighter now, full of rage and pain. It started toward me again. That's when I heard the sirens. Jim had been trying to reach me on the radio. When I didn't answer, he'd called the sheriff. They were coming up my road with lights flashing. The creature heard them too. It looked toward the approaching vehicles, then back at me. For a second, I thought it might attack anyway. But then it turned and melted back into the woods. "Bear again," the sheriff said, when I told him what happened. "We'll put together a hunting party." But I knew they'd never find it. The creature was too smart, too careful. It belonged here in a way we never would. The next morning, I went to see my cousin Ezra, who remembered the old stories. "What you saw," he told me, "that was a warden, a guardian spirit. They've been protecting the sacred places since before the Cherokee came. But it's changed, poisoned, dangerous. All that chemical runoff from the stills contaminated the spring water. Made the warden sick too. But it's still doing its job. It killed Carl. And it'll kill anyone else who threatens its territory. That spring's a sacred place. The warden won't let it be corrupted any more than it already has." There were no good answers. But I made a decision. That hollow was going to be declared off-limits. Dangerous wildlife area. It wasn't enough to bring Carl back, but it might prevent more deaths. That was 45 years ago. I'm retired now, living in the same cabin where that thing came to visit me. My lungs never fully recovered from breathing its poison vapor. I've been on oxygen for the last 10 years. The doctors call it a rare form of chemical pneumonia. They don't know what caused it. I do. Moonshine Hollow is still off-limits. Official reason is unstable geology and dangerous wildlife. The real reason is locked in a file cabinet at the ranger station in a report that only 3 people have ever read. Over the years, I've kept track of the stories. Hikers who went missing near the hollow. Hunters who came back talking about giant creatures in the deep woods. Park rangers who found massive footprints and made reports that got buried in bureaucratic files. The creature is still out there, still protecting its territory. Last month, my great-nephew called me. He's a ranger now, working the same district I used to patrol. Strange reports are coming in from all over the forest. Animals acting weird. Springs and streams that test positive for chemicals that shouldn't exist. And footprints. Lots of footprints. "Uncle Buck," he said, "I think there's more than one now. The contamination has been spreading for decades, creating more guardians, more protectors. The old Cherokee had a saying, 'When you poison the earth will poison you back.' I used to think that was just poetry. Now I know it was a warning. Carl Jenkins was a good man. He didn't deserve what happened to him. But he walked into something bigger and older and more dangerous than either of us understood. Sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing just right, I can smell that sweet, chemical scent drifting across the valley. And I know they're still out there, watching, waiting. Last week, my great-nephew found another hollow with a destroyed meth lab and those familiar massive footprints. He asked me what he should do. I told him the same thing I tell everyone who asks about the deep woods. Stay away from places that feel wrong. Trust your instincts. And if you smell something sweet and chemical on the wind, turn around and walk the other way. Some territories are marked with no trespassing signs. Others are marked with bones. The smart ones learn the difference. My name is Robert Morrison. I've been keeping this secret for 45 years. Now, it's yours to keep. But remember, some truths are more dangerous than lies. And some monsters are just trying to protect what little wilderness we have left. My name is Catherine Walsh, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what really happened at Blackwater Falls in October 1988. The official reports say 3 people died in tragic accidents. But I know better now. I was 36 then, working at Blackwater Falls State Park in West Virginia. It's a beautiful place, especially in fall when the leaves turn gold and red. The waterfall drops 57 feet into a dark pool below, and tourists come from everywhere to see it. That's also what makes it dangerous. Before becoming a ranger, I was a nurse for 8 years. I moved to the mountains after my divorce, looking for peace and quiet. I thought I'd left death behind me when I quit the hospital. I was wrong. October 1988 was unseasonably warm. The leaves were perfect, bringing more visitors than usual. That's when the death started. The first victim was Maria Santos, a young mother from Pittsburgh. She was taking pictures of the falls when she somehow lost her footing. Her husband found her body in the pool below an hour later. The strange thing was her expression completely peaceful, like she was sleeping. Accidents happen, my supervisor Tom said. Falls are slippery when wet, but I'd worked these trails for years. Maria fell from a spot with a good safety rail, in broad daylight, with no rain for 3 days. It didn't make sense. The second death happened 5 days later. Robert Chen, a college student, somehow climbed over 2 barriers to reach a restricted viewing area. His camera was found on the safe side of the rail, but his body was at the bottom of the falls. Again, that same peaceful expression. That's when the rumors started. Visitors began talking about seeing someone near the falls, a woman in white who appeared just before sunset. Local guides started telling stories about the mill owner's daughter who drowned in 1889. Tourist nonsense, I thought. Then Sarah Mitchell died. Sarah was an experienced hiker, 62 years old. She knew the dangers of waterfalls, but her hiking partner found her at the bottom, and witnesses swore they saw her talking to someone just before she fell. When asked who, they couldn't give a clear answer. A woman in an old-fashioned dress, one said. But when I looked again, no one was there. 3 deaths in 2 weeks. My job was visitor safety, and I was failing. Tom ordered increased patrols and new warning signs, but something felt wrong beyond just accidents. That evening, I walked the falls trail alone, checking for loose boards or broken rails. The sun was setting, creating long shadows through the trees. The autumn air smelled of dying leaves and damp earth. The waterfall sounded different, somehow louder, more urgent. The water volume seemed higher than normal, which was impossible. We hadn't had rain in over a week. As I approached the main viewing platform, I felt a sudden chill. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in small puffs. Then I saw her. A young woman stood at the edge of the falls, just beyond the safety rail. She wore a long white dress that looked like something from 100 years ago. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. She was beautiful, but something about her made my heart race with fear. He turned and looked directly at me. Her skin was pale as moonlight, and water dripped constantly from her hair and dress, even though she stood well away from the spray. But it was her eyes that froze me in place, deep, sad, and hungry. She smiled and gestured for me to come closer. Every instinct told me to run, but my feet moved forward against my will. She was so beautiful, so lonely looking. I wanted to help her. I was 3 steps from the rail when a squirrel ran across my path, breaking whatever spell held me. When I looked up, she was gone. I searched the area with my flashlight, calling out in case someone was really in trouble. Nothing. No footprints in the soft earth, no sign anyone had been there. But when I developed the film from my trail camera later that night, she was there in 3 different photos, standing exactly where I'd seen her. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Stress from the recent deaths, maybe. Too much coffee and not enough sleep. But the photographs were real. I stared at them for an hour, looking for some explanation. The woman appeared solid in the images, not like a double exposure or camera error. Her period dress was clearly visible, and water seemed to drip from her hair onto the wooden platform. I showed the photos to Tom. Camera malfunction, he said without hesitation. Maybe someone was doing historical reenactment photography earlier. At sunset, in a restricted area? Tom shrugged. People do stupid things for pictures. Just keep an eye out for trespassers. But I knew what I'd seen. The woman wasn't solid like a real person. She was translucent, like looking through thick glass. That afternoon, I was leading a safety talk for a group of tourists when Mrs. Henderson, an elderly visitor from Maryland, raised her hand. "Excuse me, dear," she said, "but is there someone who works here dressed in old-fashioned clothes? I saw a young lady in a long white dress yesterday evening, and she seemed to be trying to tell me something important." My blood went cold. What exactly did she do? Well, she was standing right at the edge of the water, waving for me to come closer. Such a pretty girl, but she looked so sad. I started walking toward her to see if she needed help, but my grandson grabbed my arm. When I looked back, she was gone. The grandson nodded. Grandma was heading straight for the edge. There was nobody there. Mrs. Henderson looked confused. But I saw her clear as day. She was dripping wet, like she'd just climbed out of the water. After the group left, I radioed all the rangers to watch for anyone in period costume. The responses were troubling. 3 different rangers reported seeing a woman in white near the falls over the past week, always just before sunset. Thought she was a tourist doing photography, Ranger Mike said. But when I went to check if she had permits, she vanished. That evening, I positioned myself at the main overlook an hour before sunset. I brought my camera, voice recorder, and thermometer. If something was happening, I was going to document it. The falls looked normal as tourists finished their evening visits and headed back to the parking area. By sunset, I was alone. The temperature dropped first, just like before. Then the sound of the water changed, becoming almost musical, like voices singing softly. My thermometer showed the temperature had fallen from 68 degrees to 52 inches, less than a minute. She appeared slowly, like fog forming into human shape. The woman in white materialized at the edge of the falls, water cascading around her feet. Up close, I could see her face clearly, beautiful but wrong. Her skin had the waxy pale color of a drowning victim. Her lips were blue-tinged, and her fingernails were black. But her eyes were the worst part. They held such desperate loneliness that I felt tears on my own cheeks. She reached out to me with one dripping hand and spoke in a voice like water over stones. So lonely, so cold, come with me. The pull was stronger this time. I felt myself walking toward her, drawn by compassion and something else I couldn't name. She needed help. She needed a friend. She needed... A tourist's flash camera went off behind me. The woman's head snapped toward the light, her face twisting with rage. The beautiful features became horrible skin mottled and waterlogged, eyes bulging, mouth open in a silent scream. Then she was gone. I spun around to find a young man with a camera, staring at the spot where she'd been. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "See what?" "The woman. She was right there." And then, he looked at his camera display and went pale. "She's in the photo." But she was gone before I even took the picture. I looked at his camera screen. There she was, captured in the moment of rage, no longer beautiful, but terrifying. The young man, his name was Dave, showed me 3 more photos he'd taken. In each one, the woman appeared to be getting closer to where I'd been standing. "This is impossible," Dave said. "She wasn't there when I took these shots. I was photographing the sunset, and she just appeared in the images." I gave Dave my contact information and made him promise to send me copies. Then I escorted him back to the parking lot, both of us looking over our shoulders the whole way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her eyes and the desperate need I'd seen there. She wasn't just a ghost haunting the falls for no reason. She wanted something specific. I spent hours researching the history of Blackwater Falls. The mill owner's daughter I'd heard about was named Eleanor Whitmore. She'd died in September 1889, age 19. The newspaper article was brief. "Local beauty dies in tragic fall." But I found something else in the old records. Eleanor hadn't been alone when she died. She'd been with Thomas Morrison, the young man she was engaged to marry. He survived the fall and lived until 1962. In his obituary, there was a quote that made my hands shake. Thomas never married after his fiancée's tragic death. He often spoke of hearing her voice, calling to him from the falls, begging him to join her. Eleanor wasn't just haunting the falls. She was hunting. The 4th death happened on a Tuesday. James Burton, 43, was visiting with his teenage daughter. According to her statement, he'd been acting strange all morning, distracted, constantly looking toward the falls, barely speaking. Dad kept saying someone was calling his name. His daughter told the police, but I didn't hear anything. James walked away from his daughter and straight over the safety rail. She screamed for help, but it was too late. Like the others, he was found with that same peaceful expression. But this time, there was a witness who saw more. Carol Newman was a photographer who'd been setting up equipment for sunset shots. She called me at the ranger station, her voice shaking. "I saw the woman," she said, "the one in the old dress. She was standing in the water, holding out her arms to him. He walked right into the falls like he was in a trance." "What did she look like?" "Beautiful, but wrong. Like she was underwater, but standing in air. And the water around her was flowing upward, against gravity." I met Carol at her hotel that evening. She showed me the photos she'd taken in the moments before James died. The woman in white was clearly visible in several shots, becoming more solid-looking as James approached the rail. "I don't understand how this is possible," Carol said, "but I know what I saw." The fifth death was different. Ana Rodriguez was a Forest Service employee, trained in wilderness safety. She was conducting a trail inspection when she radioed for help. "This is Ana. I need immediate assistance at the falls. There's a woman in the water who appears to be drowning." That was her last transmission. We found her body 2 hours later. But Ana was smart. She'd been wearing a small digital recorder for her inspection report. When we played it back, we could hear her side of a conversation. "Ma'am? Ma'am, can you hear me? I'm coming to help you." "What? No, I'm a forest ranger. Your dress is beautiful." "Yes, it must be cold in the water." "I understand. I'm so sorry you're alone." Then sounds of movement, and Anna's voice getting fainter. "I'm coming. Don't worry. I'll stay with you." The recording cut off after sounds of splashing. Ana had been talking to someone we couldn't hear, someone who convinced her to enter the water. That evening, I armed myself with every piece of equipment I could think of. Multiple cameras, voice recorders, thermometers, even an old EMF detector a ghost hunter had left behind years earlier. I wasn't waiting for sunset anymore. The deaths were happening in daylight now, which meant Eleanor was getting stronger. I found her at 4 in the afternoon. She stood waist-deep in the pool below the falls, her white dress flowing around her like she was floating. The water around her moved wrong, spiraling upward in thin streams, defying gravity. When she saw me, she smiled. It was a beautiful, terrible smile. "Catherine," she said, and somehow I could hear her voice clearly despite the sound of falling water. "I've been waiting for you." "Eleanor." I kept my distance but made sure she could see me. "Eleanor Whitmore." Her expression shifted to surprise, then delight. "You know my name. It's been so long since anyone remembered my name." The loneliness in her voice was heartbreaking. But I'd seen what that loneliness drove her to do. "Why are you killing people?" "Killing?" She looked genuinely confused. "I'm saving them. From loneliness, from pain. They come to me willingly. They're dying, Eleanor. They're joining me. In the water, we're together always. No more sadness, no more fear." Her voice grew excited. "Thomas was supposed to come with me, but he was too afraid. These others, they understand." The water around her began to churn more violently. I could feel the pull even from 20 feet away, not physical, but emotional. She radiated such desperate need that I wanted to comfort her. "I'm not afraid," she continued. "You don't have to be either. A nurse, yes, you understand suffering. You can end your suffering and mine." My feet moved forward without my permission. The EMF detector in my hand was screaming, the needle buried deep in the red zone. "You've been alone too," Eleanor said, her voice growing stronger. "Your husband left you. Your patients died despite your care. You came to the mountains to hide from your failures." She was right about everything. The divorce, the patients I couldn't save, the guilt that drove me to seek isolation. How could she know? "I see into hearts," Eleanor said, reading my thoughts. "I see the pain. Come to me, Catherine. In the water, we understand each other. In the water, we're never alone." I was knee-deep in the pool before I realized I was moving. The water was ice-cold but felt warm around my legs. Eleanor's smile grew wider. "Yes, that's right, just a little deeper." The voice recorder in my pocket was still running. Later, when they found my body, they'd hear this conversation. Maybe someone would understand. Eleanor reached out her hands to me. Her fingers were white as bone, with black veins visible beneath translucent skin. "Trust me," she whispered, and in that moment, I almost did. What saved me was my training. As a nurse, I'd held the hands of dying patients. I'd seen that desperate need for connection in people's final moments. Eleanor's hunger felt exactly the same, the grasping need of someone slipping away, trying to drag others down with them. She wasn't offering companionship. She was drowning, and she wanted to take everyone she could with her. I yanked my hands back, just as her fingers brushed mine. The cold that shot up my arms was beyond physical. It was the cold of death itself. "No," I said, backing away through the water. "This isn't helping them. This is murder." Eleanor's beautiful face twisted with rage. "You don't understand. I saved them from their pain. You killed them for your own pain." The water around Eleanor began to boil and churn. Her appearance shifted between beautiful young woman and waterlogged corpse. Sometimes her skin looked normal. Other times it was mottled blue-green with decay. Thomas promised to follow me, she screamed. He promised we'd be together, but he lived and lived and lived while I waited alone. The truth hit me then. Eleanor hadn't died in an accident. She'd jumped, expecting Thomas to follow. When he chose life over death, she'd been trapped by her own desperation. He was right to live, I said, still backing toward shore. Death isn't love, Eleanor. Love wants the other person to be happy, even if that means being apart. Lies. The water rose around her, defying gravity to swirl in violent spirals. Love means being together always. Then why are you still alone? The question stopped her mid-scream. The water fell back to normal levels with a crash. The people you've taken, I continued, where are they? If you're together now, why do you need more victims? Eleanor's form flickered between solid and transparent. For a moment, she looked uncertain. They fade. After a while, they fade away, and I'm alone again. Because they don't belong here. You're not saving them, you're trapping them in your death. No. But her voice was weaker now. No. They stay with me. They have to stay. I was almost to shore when my foot caught on something underwater. Looking down, I saw a human skull, then another. The bottom of the pool was littered with bones, far more than 5 recent deaths. How long have you been doing this? I whispered. Eleanor followed my gaze and smiled with pride. Since Thomas died in 1962, he finally came to me, but only for a moment before he faded too. So I found others. Lonely people, sad people, people who wanted peace. 137 years of murder. Dozens of victims. They chose to come, Eleanor said, but her voice sounded like she was trying to convince herself. They wanted to be with me. You manipulated them. You used their pain against them. I gave them what they needed. You gave them what you needed. Eleanor screamed, and the water exploded upward in a column 50 feet high. When it fell back down, she rose with it, floating above the pool in a waterspout that held her suspended. I will not be alone anymore, she shrieked. You will stay with me. The water reached for me like giant hands. I scrambled backward, slipping on wet rocks, my equipment scattering as I fought to reach dry ground. But Eleanor was stronger now, fed by a century of stolen lives. The water grabbed my ankles and yanked me back toward the pool. I went under, pulled down by currents that shouldn't exist in still water. Eleanor waited for me in the depths, her arms outstretched, her face beautiful again. Don't fight, she said, her voice clear despite being underwater. It only hurts for a moment. I was drowning, my lungs burned, and darkness crept in from the edges of my vision. Eleanor's face grew closer, and I could see myself reflected in her black eyes, pale, desperate, dying, just like her. In that moment, I understood. Eleanor wasn't evil. She was suffering, trapped in an endless cycle of death and loneliness. She'd been 19 when she died young, scared, and heartbroken. Everything she'd done since was just a scared girl trying not to be alone. I see you, I said, or tried to say. Bubbles came out instead of words, but somehow she heard me. Eleanor's eyes widened. I see your pain, I continued, using the last of my air. I see how scared you are. I see how much you've suffered. For the first time in over a century, someone looked at Eleanor and saw not a monster, but a frightened child. She released me. I shot to the surface, coughing up water, gasping for air. Eleanor rose beside me, but she wasn't trying to pull me down anymore. You see me? She whispered. Really see me? Yes. I was so afraid, she said, and now she looked like what she really was, a 19-year-old girl who'd made a terrible mistake. I was so afraid of being forgotten. You won't be forgotten, I promise. Eleanor began to fade, becoming translucent. The others, I trapped them with my fear. How do I let them go? The same way you let yourself go. Stop being afraid. Eleanor closed her eyes and took a deep breath she didn't need. When she exhaled, dozens of ghostly figures rose from the water, all her victims, finally free. They looked at Eleanor with forgiveness, not anger. Then, one by one, they faded into light and were gone. Eleanor was the last to go. Thank you, she said, for seeing me. Thank you for letting them go. She smiled, a real smile this time, peaceful and young, and dissolved into mist that sparkled once in the setting sun before disappearing forever. The The waterfall returned to normal immediately. The temperature rose, the strange currents stopped, and the water level dropped back to what it should be for this time of year. I spent that night in the hospital being treated for near drowning and hypothermia. The official report said I fell during a routine patrol and was lucky to survive. Tom didn't ask many questions. He was just glad no one else had died. But the deaths stopped completely after that night. No more mysterious accidents, no more reports of women in white. The Blackwater Falls returned to being just a beautiful, normal waterfall. I used my own money to have a small memorial plaque made. It reads, Eleanor Whitmore, 1870 to 1889, beloved daughter, no longer alone. I installed it near the main viewing area with permission from the Park Service. Visitors sometimes ask about it, and I tell them Eleanor was a local girl who died tragically young. I don't mention how she died or what came after. Some stories are too dangerous to tell. The photographs and recordings from that day disappeared from my office. I suspect Tom destroyed them, and I'm grateful. Some evidence is better lost. But I kept one thing, the voice recording from Ana Rodriguez. Late at night, when I listen carefully, I can hear Eleanor's voice too, promising comfort and companionship. It reminds me how easy it would have been to say yes. I stayed at Blackwater Falls for another 12 years before retiring. In that time, I encountered 3 more spirits at various locations in the park. Not murderous ones like Eleanor, but lost souls who needed help finding peace. My experience with Eleanor taught me something important. Ghosts aren't supernatural monsters. They're people who died with unfinished business, trapped by their own emotions. Most just need someone to acknowledge their pain and help them let go. I developed a reputation among park rangers for dealing with unusual situations. Other rangers would call when they encountered things that didn't make sense, cold spots, unexplained sounds, equipment malfunctions. Usually, it was nothing supernatural, but sometimes, it was someone who needed help moving on. Eleanor changed me. Before meeting her, I'd run away from death and suffering. After, I learned that sometimes the best way to help the living is to help the dead find peace. I still visit Blackwater Falls every October. The tourist season brings thousands of visitors to see the fall foliage, and they're all safe now. Children play on the viewing platforms while their parents take pictures. No one gets pulled toward the edge by desperate whispers. But sometimes, just at sunset, when the light hits the water just right, I see a brief shimmer that might be a young woman in white. Not threatening, not hunting, just checking to make sure her waterfall is safe. Eleanor kept her promise. She's not alone anymore, and neither, I realize, am I. The dead have their own problems, their own needs, their own pain. But they're still people, just people who happen to be dead. And sometimes, people need help, whether they're breathing or not. I never married again, but I found my purpose. There are lost souls everywhere, trapped between worlds by fear, guilt, or unfinished business. Most of them just need someone to listen, to understand, and to help them find the courage to let go. It's not the life I planned when I became a park ranger, but it's the life Eleanor gave me, and I'm grateful for it. After all, we're all haunted by something. The only question is whether we'll let our ghosts drag us down, or whether we'll help them find peace. My name is Michael Hawthorne, and I've been a ranger with the Monongahela National Forest for 18 years. In that time, I've seen bears tear apart campsites, watched hikers die from hypothermia, and pulled drowning victims from rushing streams. I thought I understood the dangers lurking in these West Virginia mountains. I was wrong. June 1972 started like any other summer. I was stationed at Cranberry Glades, a place most people don't even know exists. It's a high-altitude bog, basically a swamp that shouldn't exist this far up in the mountains. 500 acres of soggy ground, strange plants, and water so clear you can see straight to the bottom. The Cherokee called it sacred. During the Civil War, it was used as a hospital. A lot of soldiers died there from disease. I loved it anyway. I'd spent 6 years working on my PhD in botany before joining the Park Service. And Cranberry Glades was like nowhere else in Appalachia. Rare orchids grew there that you couldn't find anywhere else for hundreds of miles. The cranberries gave the place its name, growing in thick mats across the peat. In winter, the bog froze solid. In summer, it stayed cool, usually around 70 degrees, even when the valleys below hit 90. That's why the heat wave bothered me. It was the third week of June, right around the summer solstice, and the temperature at the glades hit 95 degrees. That wasn't right. The bog's ecosystem depended on staying cool. I spent my mornings checking on the rare plants, making sure they weren't dying off. That's when I got the radio call about the research team. Dr. Sarah Chen from West Virginia University had brought 4 graduate students up to study a rare orchid species that only bloomed for 2 weeks in June. They'd been camping at the glades for 5 days. Standard procedure. I'd approved their permits myself, given them the safety talk, showed them where to set up their camp away from the fragile bog plants. "Michael, we need you at the Chen camp," dispatch said. They called in about animal attacks. I grabbed my medical kit and headed out. The walk to their campsite took 20 minutes, following the wooden boardwalk we'd built to keep people from sinking into the peat. The air smelled raw and too sweet, like overripe fruit mixed with the usual smell of wet earth and cranberries. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Bogs are never quiet. There's always something: birds, frogs, insects buzzing. But as I got closer to the research camp, I couldn't hear anything except my own boots on the wooden planks. Then I saw the birds. A dozen of them, scattered across the boardwalk and floating in the shallow water. Warblers, wrens, even a small hawk. All dead. I knelt down to check one. No visible injuries, but when I turned it over, I saw 2 small puncture marks on its neck, right where the jugular would be. The blood was gone. The bird felt like a deflated balloon. "Hello?" I called out. "Dr. Chen?" No answer. I found the research camp in a small clearing about 50 yards from the boardwalk. 3 tents, a folding table covered in plant specimens and notebooks, camping chairs arranged around a cold fire pit. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The plants were wrong. The orchids they'd been studying, small, delicate things with purple petals, had grown huge. Some were 3 feet tall, their stems thick as my thumb, petals the size of dinner plates, and they were moving. Not swaying in the wind, actually moving, turning toward me like they were watching. I pulled out my pH meter to test the water near the plants. The reading showed 2 impossibly acidic, like battery acid. I tested it again, thinking the meter was broken. Same reading. "Help." The voice came from the largest tent. I ran over and unzipped it. Dr. Chen was inside, lying on top of her sleeping bag. Her skin looked gray, her lips almost white. She tried to sit up, but couldn't. "What happened?" I asked, checking her pulse. It was weak, barely there. "Something in the bog," she whispered. "It came at night. We couldn't see it clearly. It was like it wasn't really there." "Where are your students?" "The other tents. They're alive, but..." I checked the other tents. All 4 students were in the same condition, breathing, conscious, but barely. Their skin was cold to the touch. And when I lifted one student's eyelid to check his pupils, I saw the whites of his eyes were yellow. Every single one of them had the same 2 puncture marks on their neck. I radioed for medical evacuation and started treating the team for severe blood loss. It didn't make sense. The puncture wounds were tiny, no bigger than needle marks. You couldn't lose enough blood through holes that small to end up looking like this. While I waited for the helicopter, I walked the perimeter of their camp. That's when I found the tracks. They were pressed deep into the soft peat, each one about 10 inches long. 3 toes ending in what looked like claw marks. But the strangest thing was how they moved. The tracks walked in a straight line from the bog toward the camp, then back again. And they didn't sink the way they should have. The peat was soft enough that my boots went down 2 inches with each step. These tracks were only a 1/4 inch deep, like whatever made them weighed almost nothing. Or walked on top of the water. The helicopter arrived an hour later. The paramedics looked at the research team and immediately started IV fluids. "Severe anemia," one of them told me. "Like they've been bleeding for days, but there's barely any blood around the camp. Can you tell what caused the puncture wounds?" He looked at Dr. Chen's neck through a magnifying glass. "Some kind of hollow needle, maybe, like a mosquito, but bigger. I've never seen anything like it." After they left, I stayed at the camp to collect evidence. The sun was starting to drop behind the mountains, and the temperature fell fast. By 6 o'clock, it was back down to 70 degrees. The giant orchids started shrinking, their petals curling up like they were going to sleep. I tested the bog water again. pH 6.5. Normal. Something was happening here that only showed up in the heat. I decided to spend the night. If there was an animal attacking people, I needed to see it, identify it, figure out how to keep other visitors safe. I set up my tent near the boardwalk, built a fire, and made coffee in my camping pot. The sun went down around 8:30. By 9, it was completely dark except for my fire and the beam of my flashlight. That's when the sounds started. At first, I thought it was just the bog settling. Peat bogs make all kinds of weird noises as the ground shifts and gases bubble up from the decomposing plants below. But these sounds were different, wet, like something large pushing through shallow water. I pointed my flashlight toward the bog. The beam reached about 50 feet, showing me cranberry plants and shallow pools of dark water. Nothing moving, but I could hear it getting closer. I put more wood on the fire, making it burn brighter. Whatever was out there, most animals don't like fire. They should stay away. The sound stopped. I sat there for an hour, listening. Nothing. Maybe I'd scared it off. Then I heard breathing. It was right behind my tent. I grabbed my flashlight and spun around. The beam caught something moving, a shape pulling back into the darkness. Tall, hunched, grayish-green. I only saw it for a second before it disappeared. But I saw enough. It was standing upright, like a person. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire going, kept my flashlight ready, and listened to the thing circle my camp. It never came close enough to see clearly, but I knew it was there. Watching, waiting. When the sun came up, I found more tracks. They circled my tent 3 times, never getting closer than 20 feet. The same 3-toed prints, barely sinking into the ground. I followed them into the bog. The tracks led me away from the boardwalk, into a part of the glades I'd never explored. The ground got softer, the water deeper. I had to test each step carefully to avoid sinking. The tracks kept going, moving across patches of open water like they were walking on solid ground. Then they just stopped. I was standing in the middle of a shallow pool, water up to my knees, looking at where the tracks ended. There was nothing around me but cranberry plants and open water. Whatever made these tracks had just vanished. That's when I saw the feeding ground. It was a small island of solid ground about 30 yards away, covered in tall grass. I waded over to it and found dozens of dead animals. Rabbits, squirrels, a fox, even a small deer. All of them had the same puncture marks on their necks. All of them drained dry, and they were arranged in a circle, heads pointing inward, like some kind of ritual. I'd seen a lot of strange things in nature, but this wasn't natural. Animals don't arrange their kills in patterns. They don't drain the blood and leave the meat behind. Something was hunting in Cranberry Glades, something that killed like a vampire. I radioed headquarters and told them to close Cranberry Glades to visitors. I didn't tell them why, just said there was a potentially dangerous animal in the area and I needed time to investigate. They trusted me enough not to ask too many questions. That gave me 3 days before they'd send someone to check on me. I spent the first day setting up cameras around the bog. Trail cameras that would take a picture whenever something moved past them. I put them on trees, on posts along the boardwalk, and on stakes I drove into the solid ground around the feeding area. On the second day, I went to the library in the nearest town and looked up everything I could find about Cranberry Glades. Most of it I already knew: the Cherokee history, the Civil War hospital, the unique ecosystem, but I found one article from 1923 that caught my attention. It was a newspaper story about a bog monster that had supposedly killed 2 hunters. The article called it superstition, blamed the deaths on a bear, and that was the end of it. But the description the surviving hunter gave matched what I'd seen: something that walked upright, had grayish-green skin, and could disappear into the bog like a ghost. The article said the Cherokee had a name for it. They called it the Bog Keeper, and they believed it protected the sacred places by feeding on anyone who disturbed them. On the third day, I checked my cameras. Every single one had been destroyed. Not knocked over, destroyed. Smashed into pieces, the film exposed to light, the metal parts bent and twisted. Whatever did this was smart enough to know what the cameras were for. And it was strong. I was examining the broken cameras when I heard screaming. It was coming from the north end of the glades, near the main parking area. I ran toward it, following the boardwalk, my boots pounding on the wood. The screaming stopped before I got there. I found a pickup truck in the parking lot. The driver's door was open, keys still in the ignition. A fishing rod leaned against the bumper. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone here?" I followed boot prints from the truck onto the boardwalk. They led about 100 yards into the bog, then stopped at a broken section of railing. I looked down into the shallow water below. A man floated face down in the cranberry plants. I climbed down and pulled him out. He was still breathing, but his skin was gray and cold. 2 puncture marks on his neck. I dragged him back to the parking lot and radioed for help. While I waited, he started waking up. "What happened?" I asked. His eyes were unfocused, confused. "I was fishing. I heard something in the water. When I turned around, it was right there. I couldn't see it clearly, like it was part of the fog. It grabbed me, and then what? It bit me, but not with teeth. It felt like it was drinking me." The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. As they loaded the man into it, I noticed something. The fog he mentioned, there wasn't any fog. It was a clear, hot day, 93 degrees. But when I looked back at the bog, I could see a patch of mist hanging over the water right where I'd found him. And it was moving. Against the wind, I walked back to the spot with my flashlight and my knife. The mist stayed ahead of me, drifting deeper into the bog. I followed it, stepping carefully on the wet ground. The mist led me to a part of the glades I'd never been to before. The water was deeper here, nearly up to my waist. The cranberry plants gave way to taller grasses and strange ferns I didn't recognize. The air smelled like copper and rotting meat. Then the mist disappeared. I stood there in the waist-deep water, turning in a slow circle with my flashlight. Nothing, just plants and dark water. Something touched my leg. I jumped back, splashing, pointing the flashlight down. I couldn't see anything in the murky water, but I felt it again, something sliding along my calf, smooth and cold. I started backing towards solid ground. The thing followed me, brushing against my legs, circling. I was 10 feet from the shore when I saw it. The water in front of me rippled. Something was rising up, breaking the surface. First, I saw the head narrow, reptilian, with huge eyes that reflected my flashlight like a cat's. Then the body tall and thin, covered in grayish-green skin that seemed to shift colors, matching the plants around it. Spines ran down its back, and its arms were long, ending in webbed hands with black claws. It stood there in the waist-deep water, at least 6 feet tall, staring at me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then it opened its mouth, and I saw the feeding tube, a long, needle-like appendage that unfolded from the back of its throat, dripping with something that looked like saliva. I ran. I made it back to the research station, a small cabin near the parking lot. I locked the door, pulled the curtains, and tried to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the radio. "Dispatch, this is Hawthorne. I need backup at Cranberry Glades immediately." Static, then, "Copy that. What's the situation?" What could I tell them? That I'd seen a monster? That there was a 6-foot reptile man in the bog that drank people's blood? "Dangerous animal," I said. "Possible attack on visitors. Send armed rangers." "Roger. ETA 2 hours." 2 hours. I looked at my watch. It was 6:30. The sun would set by 8:30. I had 2 hours until dark, and then 2 more hours until help arrived. I wasn't going to make it. I spent the next hour going through the research station's supplies. Flares, a first aid kit, some old camping equipment. And in the back closet, I found something useful, containers of chemical supplies left over from water testing. Hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid, various bases. The bog creature had reptilian skin. Reptiles have thin, permeable skin. Acid would burn it. I mixed the strongest acid solution I could make, poured it into empty water bottles, and made crude acid bombs. If the thing came after me, I'd have something to fight back with. The sun set. I lit a propane lantern and kept it burning bright in the middle of the cabin. I remembered the thing's camouflage, how it had matched the bog plants perfectly, making itself nearly invisible. But that camouflage would need time to adjust. If I kept the environment bright and changing, maybe I could see it coming. At 9 o'clock, I heard scratching on the roof. I grabbed one of my acid bottles and pointed my flashlight at the ceiling. The scratching moved from one side to the other, then stopped at the chimney. Something was coming down. I backed away from the fireplace. The damper rattled, then fell open. The creature's feeding tube came through first, that long needle-like appendage, searching the air like a snake's tongue. Then its hand, those webbed claws scraping on the metal. It was trying to squeeze through the chimney. I threw the acid bottle. It hit the fireplace and exploded, splashing acid up into the chimney. The creature screamed a horrible hissing, gurgling sound that didn't seem like it could come from anything natural. The feeding tube retreated. I heard scrambling on the roof, then silence. I waited. 10 minutes, 20, nothing. Then, every window in the cabin shattered at once. The creature came through the front window, moving so fast I barely saw it. 1 second I was alone. The next it was standing in the middle of the cabin, surrounded by broken glass, its skin shifting colors rapidly as it tried to match the changing light from the lantern. We stared at each other. Up close, I could see details I'd missed before. The spines on its back weren't just defensive, they were sensory organs, constantly moving, tasting the air. Its eyes had a double eyelid, one transparent for underwater vision, and its skin wasn't just changing color, it was actually becoming transparent in places, letting me see the muscles and bones underneath. It wasn't just camouflaged, it was becoming the environment. "What are you?" I whispered. It tilted its head, studying me. Then it did something I didn't expect. It spoke. Not in English, in sounds, clicks and hisses and wet breathing noises. But somehow I understood. Maybe it was the way it moved, or some instinct in my brain translating the sounds. I don't know. But I understood. The bog was dying. The heat, the pollution, the people constantly disturbing it, it was killing the ecosystem. The creature wasn't a monster. It was a keeper, something that had lived in cranberry glades for thousands of years, feeding on the blood of animals to maintain the balance. The Cherokee had known about it. They'd made a deal, stay away from the sacred sites, and the keeper wouldn't hunt people. But people had broken that deal. Now the keeper was dying too. It was feeding on humans because there weren't enough animals left. The bog plants were growing wrong, the water was becoming toxic, everything was falling apart, and it was our fault. I looked at this creature, this ancient thing that had protected cranberry glades since before my ancestors crossed the ocean, and I felt ashamed. "I'm sorry," I said. It moved closer. The feeding tube emerged from its mouth, dripping. I could smell it now, sweet and metallic, like rotten flowers and blood. I raised another acid bottle. "But I can't let you kill anyone else." The creature lunged. I threw the bottle. It hit the creature's chest and exploded. The acid burned through its camouflage skin, exposing the flesh underneath. The creature screamed and stumbled back, crashing into the wall. I ran for the door. The creature was faster. It caught me halfway. One clawed hand wrapping around my shoulder, spinning me around. The feeding tube shot toward my neck. I punched it with my other hand, the one holding the last acid bottle. The bottle broke against its face. Acid splashed across its eyes. It let go, thrashing, making that horrible gurgling scream. I ran outside into the darkness. Behind me, I heard the cabin wall exploding outward as the creature came after me. I made it to the parking lot. My truck was there, keys in the ignition, standard procedure for emergency vehicles. I jumped in and started the engine. The creature hit the truck like a freight train. The whole vehicle rocked sideways. I saw it in the rearview mirror, climbing onto the roof, its damaged face pressed against the back window, feeding tube scratching at the glass. I floored it. The truck shot forward, and the creature fell off, landing hard on the pavement. I didn't stop. I drove toward the main road, watching in the mirror as the creature stood up, turned, and walked back toward the bog. It didn't chase me. It just went home. The backup rangers found me 3 miles down the road, sitting in my truck, bleeding from where the creature's claws had torn through my shoulder. They took me to the hospital. The doctors said I'd lost a lot of blood, but not from the claw wounds. From the 2 small puncture marks on my neck that I hadn't even noticed. The research team recovered, mostly. Dr. Chen and her students all suffered from long-term anemia and strange memory problems. They couldn't remember exactly what had attacked them. Their brains had blocked it out. The fishermen I'd pulled from the bog didn't remember anything at all. The Park Service launched an investigation. They searched cranberry glades for 3 weeks, looking for whatever had attacked us. They found the dead animals, the strange tracks, the destroyed cameras, but they never found the creature. They blamed it on a rare blood-borne pathogen in the bog water. some kind of bacteria that caused hallucinations and severe anemia. They closed Cranberry Glades to the public indefinitely, pending environmental cleanup. I never told them the truth. Who would believe me? But I went back. 3 months later, after I'd healed, after the Park Service had stopped watching me so closely, I went back to Cranberry Glades alone, at night, and I walked into the bog. I found the creature at the feeding ground, that small island where it had arranged all the dead animals in a circle. It was dying. Its skin had lost the ability to change colors. It was just a dull gray now. Its eyes were cloudy. The spines on its back hung limp. The bog was killing it, and the bog was dying too. The rare orchids were gone. The cranberries were turning brown. The water smelled like chemicals. "I'm sorry," I said again. "I don't know how to fix this." The creature looked at me. It didn't try to attack. It just looked, like it was saying goodbye. I visit Cranberry Glades once a month now. It's still closed to the public, which makes it easier. I test the water, check the plants, document the damage. The Park Service thinks I'm obsessed, that the attack gave me PTSD, and I'm trying to cope by monitoring the place that hurt me. They're wrong. I'm watching, waiting, because sometimes, on hot nights in June, I see movement in the fog. I see three-toed tracks that don't sink into the peat. I hear that wet breathing sound in the darkness. The keeper isn't dead. It's hiding, surviving, adapting to a bog that's being poisoned by progress. And someday, when Cranberry Glades gets sick enough, when there aren't enough animals left to feed it, it's going to start hunting people again. And next time, there might be more than one. I know this because last month, I found something new at the feeding ground. Not dead animals arranged in a circle, something else. Eggs. 3 of them, buried in the peat, each one the size of a football, covered in grayish-green scales that shift colors in the light. The keeper isn't just surviving, it's making more. My name is Elizabeth Harper, and I've been a park ranger for 21 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, rattlesnakes, flash floods, climbers who thought they knew better than gravity. I was wrong about that last part. People call me Liz. I'm 45, stubborn as a mule, and the first woman to become a climbing instructor for the National Park Service. The guys gave me hell for it at first, but after I pulled 3 of them off a ledge during an ice storm, they started listening when I talked about mountain safety. Seneca Rocks has been my beat for the last 8 years. It's a 900-foot wall of white quartzite that shoots straight up from the West Virginia hills like God's own skyscraper. Climbers come from all over the world to test themselves against these walls. Most days, I love watching them work their way up the rock, moving like dancers on the vertical stage. April 1981 was shaping up to be a perfect climbing season. The weather was crisp and clear, the rock was dry, and the spring crowds were just starting to show up. Everything felt normal until it didn't. The first sign something was wrong came from the birds, or rather, the lack of them. I was doing my morning patrol on April 15th when I noticed the silence. Seneca Rocks sits in the middle of prime eagle territory. Every spring, we get pairs of bald eagles and red-tailed hawks setting up nests in the high places. The sound of their calls echoing off the rock faces is as much a part of spring as the wildflowers blooming in the valleys below. But that morning, the sky was empty. No eagles soaring on the thermals, no hawks circling. Even the smaller birds seemed to have vanished. The only sound was the wind whistling through the rocks. I made a note in my logbook but didn't think much of it. Wildlife can be unpredictable. Maybe a storm was coming, even though the sky was clear as glass. The second sign came 3 days later when Tommy Martinez didn't come back from his climb. Tommy was what we called a peak bagger, a guy who collected summits like other people collected baseball cards. He'd been climbing the technical routes at Seneca for 15 years and knew every hold, every crack, every place where the rock would hold your weight and where it wouldn't. If Tommy was going up a route, you could set your watch by when he'd come down. He'd signed in at the ranger station that morning, planning to solo the Old Man's Route, a classic 5.6 climb up the South Peak. It's not the hardest route on the mountain, but it's long and exposed. Tommy figured 4 hours up and down. When he didn't show up by sunset, I organized a search party. We found his pack at the base of the route, neatly arranged like he'd just stopped for a lunch break. His water bottle was still full. His extra rope was coiled perfectly, but Tommy was gone. What bothered me most was where we found his gear. Not his pack, his climbing gear. 150 feet up the route, we spotted something metal glinting in a crack. I had to rappel down from the top to reach it. It was Tommy's protection, a hex nut wedged deep into a crack in the rock. But here's the thing. The crack was barely an inch wide. You'd need a tiny piece of gear to fit in there, something you'd use for delicate face climbing. Tommy's hex was massive, the kind of thing you'd use to protect against a big fall on an easier route. And it was buried in the crack, like someone had driven it in with a sledgehammer. I stared at that piece of gear for 10 minutes, trying to make sense of it. The metal was scored with deep gouges, like something with claws had grabbed it and squeezed. But what kind of animal could fly 150 feet up a cliff face and have the strength to crush hardened steel? The wind picked up while I was hanging there on my rope, and for a second, I could have sworn I heard something else, a sound like leather flapping, but deeper and slower than any bird I knew. I looked up, scanning the sky, but saw nothing except a few wispy clouds. That night, I called the state police and filed a missing person report. But in my gut, I knew Tommy wasn't lost somewhere in the woods waiting for rescue. Something had taken him from that cliff face, and I had no idea what. The third incident happened 5 days later, and this time, there was a witness. Sarah Chen was a climbing guide from California, the kind of professional who could make a vertical wall look like a sidewalk. She'd come to Seneca with a client, a banker from DC, who wanted to tick some East Coast classics off his list. They were climbing Cons West, a moderate route up the North Peak, when Sarah saw it happen. It came out of nowhere, she told me later, her hands shaking as she wrapped them around a cup of coffee in my office. 1 second, Dave was 20 feet above me, placing a cam in a good crack. The next second, this shadow passed over us, and Dave was just gone. I leaned forward in my chair. What kind of shadow? Big, really big. Like a plane flying low, but there was no sound. No engine noise, no propeller, just this whooshing like wind through a tunnel. She looked out my window toward the rocks. I heard Dave scream, but it was fading fast, like he was being carried away. Did you see what took him? Sarah shook her head. I was looking at the rock, trying to figure out my next move. By the time I looked up, there was nothing there except sky. We found Dave's body 2 days later, and that's when I started to understand we were dealing with something that didn't belong in any Park Service manual. A local sheriff's deputy spotted buzzards circling about half a mile from the climbing area, up in a section of cliff that doesn't have any established routes. When we hiked up to investigate, we found Dave wedged into a narrow ledge about 400 feet off the deck. The medical examiner said he'd died from the fall, but what I couldn't figure out was how he'd gotten there. The ledge was completely inaccessible from below, and there were no anchor points above it where someone could have lowered a body. The cliff face was smooth quartzite, polished by wind and rain until it was slick as glass. But it wasn't the location that kept me awake that night. It was the condition of the ledge itself. The rock around Dave's body was scarred with deep grooves, like someone had taken a chisel to the stone. The marks were in sets of 4, each gouge about an inch wide and 6 inches deep. They scored the rock in parallel lines, and when I knelt down and measured them, I found they were exactly the same spacing as the marks we'd found on Tommy's climbing gear. I took photographs and sent them to a wildlife biologist I knew at the university. Dr. Patterson called me back the same evening. "Those aren't tool marks," she said, without any greeting. "They're talon marks." "But Liz, no bird in North America has talons that size. We're talking about something with feet the size of dinner plates." I stared at the photos spread across my desk. What about extinct species? Could there be something we don't know about living up in these mountains? The largest known bird of prey in North America was the Teratornis. It went extinct about 10,000 years ago. Even that didn't have talons this big. Her voice got quiet. "Liz, what exactly are you dealing with up there?" I didn't have an answer for her then. I was still trying to convince myself there was a rational explanation for what was happening. Maybe someone was using the climbing areas to dump bodies and making it look like accidents. Maybe there was a serial killer with a helicopter who was targeting climbers. But deep down, I was starting to remember stories my grandmother used to tell when I was little. Stories about the old days when the Seneca people considered these rocks sacred and wouldn't hunt in the valleys below them. Stories about sky hunters who took the bravest warriors as tribute. Stories about thunderbirds. On April 28th, I got my first real look at what we were up against. I was doing an evening patrol, checking that all the climbing parties had made it down safely, when I heard voices echoing off the cliff faces. 2 climbers were working their way up Gunsight to South Peak, a classic route that follows a natural break in the rock face. I could see them through my binoculars, a man and woman, moving steadily up the wall with the smooth efficiency that comes from years of partnership. They were about 300 feet up, maybe an hour from the summit. That's when the sky went dark. Not cloudy, dark. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was like someone had thrown a blanket over the sun. I looked up and saw the silhouette. It was massive. The wingspan had to be 25 feet, maybe more. It flew in complete silence, circling the climbing route like a shark circling a boat. From my position at the base of the cliff, I could just make out the details. Bronze-colored feathers that seemed to shimmer in the dying light. A head the size of a beer keg, with a curved beak that could probably bite through a car tire. And eyes. Even from 400 feet away, I could see those eyes tracking the climbers as they moved up the rock. I grabbed my radio and tried to call the climbers, but all I got was static. The thing in the sky was interfering with the signal somehow. I watched in helpless horror as the bird folded its wings and dove. The woman saw it coming first. I heard her scream echo off the rocks, a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. She tried to duck against the cliff face, but there was nowhere to go. The bird's talons closed around her like she was a mouse, and then they were both airborne. The man was shouting her name, but his voice was already fading as the bird carried her away toward the higher peaks. Within seconds, they had disappeared into the gathering dusk. I stood at the base of that cliff for an hour, waiting to see if the bird would come back for the man. It never did. When rescue arrived, we brought him down, but he was in shock and couldn't tell us much more than I'd already seen. The woman's name was Jennifer Walsh. She was 32 years old, a nurse from Pittsburgh who climbed on weekends to stay sane. She had a husband and 2 kids waiting for her at home. We never found her body. That night, I sat in my office with the door locked and all the lights on, trying to figure out what to do next. I had 3 dead climbers, 1 missing, and a creature the size of a small airplane hunting in my park. The logical thing to do was call my supervisor and let someone else handle it. But those weren't just statistics in my incident reports. They were people who had trusted the mountains to give them a fair fight, and I was the one responsible for keeping them safe. I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out the folder where I kept the local history materials. Old newspaper clippings, archaeological reports, Native American folklore. Somewhere in all that paper, I hoped to find an answer. What I found instead was a warning that was almost 200 years too late. The warning came from a letter written in 1847 by a surveyor named William Decker. He'd been hired by the state to map the mountainous regions of what would later become West Virginia, and his job had brought him to Seneca Rocks. The letter was addressed to his supervisor in Charleston, and I found a copy of it in the Historical Society files. Most of it was boring technical stuff about property boundaries and mineral rights, but one paragraph made my blood run cold. Asterisk, I must report that the local Seneca refused to guide us near the White Rocks, claiming the sky hunters nest there. When pressed for details, the chief spoke of great birds that steal away the bravest warriors, carrying them to nests in impossible places. He showed me markings on trees near the formation, claw marks too large for any known bird. I dismissed these as superstition until yesterday, when I observed with my own eyes a shadow of impossible size circle our camp. My men refused to continue the survey. Asterisk. The letter was dated 3 weeks before Decker's disappearance. His body was found 2 months later on a ledge high up on the North Peak, in a location that should have been impossible to reach. I photocopied the letter and put it in my desk drawer next to my service revolver. Then I started making phone calls. Dr. Patterson connected me with a colleague at the Smithsonian who specialized in extinct American birds. Professor Martinez had studied Teratornis fossils and knew more about giant birds than anyone alive. The largest flying bird ever discovered in North America had a wingspan of about 12 feet, he told me over a crackling long-distance connection. That was the Argentavis, and it lived in South America, not here. What you're describing is 3 times that size. But is it possible? I pressed. Could something that large actually exist? There was a long pause. From a purely theoretical standpoint, a bird that size would face enormous challenges. The square cube law means that as you scale up an animal, its weight increases much faster than its wing area. A 25-foot wingspan bird would need hollow bones and an incredibly efficient respiratory system just to get off the ground. So it's impossible? I didn't say that. Nature has a way of finding solutions we don't expect. But if such a creature existed, it would need to be perfectly adapted for flight. Every part of its body would be optimized for staying airborne. He paused again. Why are you asking me this, Ranger Harper? I told him about the disappearances, leaving out the part about actually seeing the bird. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Liz, if you're dealing with what I think you're dealing with, you need to understand something important. A predator that size wouldn't hunt randomly. It would be intelligent, patient, and selective. It would study its prey before striking. What do you mean? Think about how eagles hunt. They don't just grab whatever's available. They watch. They learn patterns. They wait for the right moment. A bird the size you're describing would be even more calculating. It would want prey that was worth the energy expenditure. That conversation changed how I looked at the whole situation. The bird wasn't just picking off random climbers. It was choosing them. Tommy Martinez, 15 years of climbing experience, known for attempting difficult routes solo. Dave the banker had hired a guide specifically to climb challenging routes above his normal ability level. Jennifer Walsh, an experienced nurse who climbed technical routes on weekends. They weren't victims of opportunity. They were trophies. I spent the next day going through every climbing registry from the past month, looking for patterns. What I found made my hands shake. Every missing climber had signed up for routes rated 5.6 or higher, technical climbs that required skill and experience. The bird was taking the good climbers and leaving the beginners alone. But why? The answer came to me on May 3rd, when I was doing a sunrise patrol and found something that shouldn't have existed. High up on the North Peak, in a section of cliff that was supposed to be unclimbable, I spotted something reflecting the morning light. I borrowed a powerful telescope from the visitor center and set it up in the parking lot. What I saw through that lens nearly made me drop the equipment. It was a nest. Not a normal bird's nest made of sticks and grass, but something that looked like it had been built by an engineer. The structure was wedged into a crack in the cliff face that was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. It was made of branches, but also of something else. Climbing gear. Ropes, carabiners, harnesses, helmets, all woven together into a massive platform that had to be 20 feet across. And scattered throughout the construction were white objects that I tried very hard not to identify. But I knew what they were. I'd seen enough climbing accidents to recognize human bones when I saw them. The nest was positioned in a spot that was invisible from below and impossible to reach from above. The only way to get there would be to fly. I was still staring through the telescope when I saw movement in the nest. Something large and bronze-colored shifted in the shadows, and then a head the size of a basketball appeared at the edge of the platform. The bird was looking right at me. Even through the telescope, even from half a mile away, I could feel those eyes studying me. They were intelligent eyes, calculating and patient. The head tilted slightly, like the bird was trying to figure out what I was and whether I was worth its attention. Then it spread its wings. I've never seen anything so beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The wingspan was enormous, each feather clearly defined and gleaming like polished bronze in the morning light. When the bird launched itself from the nest, it moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. It circled once, gaining altitude, and then began flying directly toward my position. I grabbed the telescope and ran for my truck, but I wasn't fast enough. The shadow passed over me when I was halfway across the parking lot, and the downdraft from those massive wings nearly knocked me flat. I dove behind my vehicle and looked up in time to see the bird circling overhead, studying me with the same cold intelligence I'd seen through the telescope. It made 3 slow circles, each one lower than the last, before suddenly folding its wings and diving straight down. I thought it was going to grab me right there in the parking lot, but at the last second, it pulled up and landed on the roof of the visitor center. The building shook under its weight, and I heard the metal groaning as its talons punched through the roofing material. For 30 seconds, we stared at each other across 50 feet of empty space. The bird's head was massive, with a curved beak that looked like it could tear through steel. But it was the eyes that got to me. Dark, intelligent, and completely without fear. Then it spread its wings again and took off, heading back toward the high peaks. But before it disappeared, it did something that made my blood freeze. It screamed. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard. Deeper than an eagle's cry, louder than a lion's roar, with harmonics that seemed to come from somewhere prehistoric. The scream echoed off the cliff faces for what felt like minutes, rolling through the valleys like thunder. And I understood what it was telling me. It knew I was watching. It knew I was trying to figure out how to stop it, and it wasn't afraid of me at all. That afternoon, I closed Seneca Rocks to all climbing activities. The closure order didn't sit well with anyone. My supervisor called from Charleston, demanding to know why I'd shut down the most popular climbing area in the state without authorization. The local climbing guides were furious about lost business. The climbing community was posting angry messages on bulletin boards and spreading rumors that I'd lost my mind. I let them talk. I'd rather deal with angry climbers than dead ones. But I knew the closure was only a temporary solution. The bird had been hunting these rocks for who knows how long, and it wasn't going to give up its territory just because I'd posted some signs. If I wanted to really protect people, I was going to have to deal with the creature directly. The problem was, I had no idea how to fight something that could fly. I spent 3 days researching everything I could find about thunderbirds in Native American folklore. Most of the stories were vague, focusing more on the spiritual significance of the creatures than their physical characteristics. But I found a few details that gave me hope. According to Seneca legend, thunderbirds could be temporarily blinded by bright lights, especially during the day when their eyes were adapted for distance vision. They were also said to be vulnerable to injury during flight. Damage to their wings would ground them, making them easier to fight. It wasn't much, but it was something to work with. I put together a kit of emergency flares, a powerful spotlight, and a climbing rope with a grappling hook. If I could get the bird on the ground, I might have a chance against it. The key would be getting it to come to me instead of trying to climb up to its nest. The opportunity came on May 8th, when I spotted fresh talon marks on the rock face near Gunsight to South Peak. The bird was still hunting, even with the area closed. That meant it would be back. I set up my position on a ledge about halfway up the South Peak, a spot that was accessible by hiking trail but still high enough to seem like climbing territory. Then I waited. The bird showed up at sunset, just as I'd hoped. I saw it circling high above the peaks, probably looking for any climbers who might have ignored the closure signs. When it didn't find any obvious prey, it began a systematic search pattern, spiraling down toward the lower elevations. When it was about 200 feet above me, I triggered the spotlight. The reaction was immediate and violent. The bird let out that same prehistoric scream I'd heard in the parking lot, but this time it was filled with pain and rage. It tried to bank away from the light, but its vision was compromised, and it smashed into the cliff face with a sound like a car accident. I kept the light trained on it as it tumbled through the air, wings flailing as it tried to regain control. It managed to land on a broad ledge about 50 feet below my position, but it was clearly hurt. One wing was dragging, and it was making harsh breathing sounds. That's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I thought I'd won. I rappelled down to the ledge, planning to use the flares to drive the bird away from the climbing areas permanently. I figured that if I could hurt it enough, it would find somewhere else to hunt. But as soon as my feet touched the ledge, I realized how wrong I'd been about everything. The bird wasn't just some oversized predator. It was intelligent, and it had been playing with me. The wing that had been dragging was suddenly working fine. The bird rose to its full height, nearly 8 feet tall, and fixed me with those dark, calculating eyes. Its beak opened, revealing a mouth full of teeth that no normal bird should have had. I reached for a flare, but I was too slow. Those massive talons closed around my torso, pinning my arms to my sides. The grip was like being caught in a vise made of knives. Then we were airborne. Flying in the grip of that creature was the most terrifying experience of my life. We climbed rapidly, the ground falling away below us, until the trees looked like a green carpet. I could feel the power in those wings, each beat carrying us higher with impossible ease. The bird was taking me to its nest. The flight felt like it lasted forever, but it was probably only 3 or 4 minutes before we reached the narrow crack in the north peak where the creature had built its home. Up close, the construction was even more horrifying than I'd imagined. The nest was anchored in the crack by dozens of climbing ropes, all of them stained dark with old blood. The platform itself was a nightmare collage of human gear and human bones. I could see skulls wedged between coils of rope, femurs used as structural supports, rib cages that had been picked clean and arranged like macabre decorations. The bird dropped me onto the platform and landed beside me, folding its wings with a sound like canvas snapping in the wind. This close, I could see details that made my stomach churn. The bronze feathers were actually metallic, with a surface that seemed to shift and change color depending on the angle of the light. The talons were like curved daggers, each one as long as my forearm, but it was the intelligence in those eyes that scared me most. This wasn't just a predator, it was a collector, and I was about to become part of its collection. The bird studied me for a moment, head tilted in that predatory way that raptors have. Then it reached out with one massive foot and began tearing at my climbing gear, stripping away my harness and helmet with surgical precision. I understood what was happening. It was preparing me for the nest, arranging me like all the other trophies it had collected over the years. That's when I remembered the flare gun clipped to my belt. The bird was focused on my gear, using its beak to cut through the nylon straps of my harness. I managed to work my right hand free and grabbed the flare gun, bringing it up in one smooth motion. The flare hit the bird's center mass, and the reaction was immediate. The creature let out a scream that nearly burst my eardrums and stumbled backward, wings spread for balance. The magnesium fire clung to its feathers, and I could smell burning protein mixed with something metallic. I rolled away from the bird and grabbed a length of climbing rope from the nest's construction. The creature was thrashing around, trying to extinguish the fire, and in its pain and rage, it had moved too close to the edge of the platform. I wrapped the rope around my hands and charged. The impact sent both of us tumbling off the nest and into open air. For a heart-stopping moment, we were both falling, the ground rushing up to meet us at terminal velocity. But the bird's survival instincts kicked in. Despite the pain from the flare, it managed to spread its wings and arrest our fall. We were still descending fast, but now it was a controlled descent instead of a death plunge. The landing was rough. We hit a steep slope covered in loose rock, and both of us went tumbling down the mountainside in a chaos of wings, talons, and cursing. I managed to roll free when we finally stopped, but my left shoulder felt like it was on fire, and I could taste blood in my mouth. The bird was hurt worse than I was. The crash landing had damaged its left wing, and it was having trouble getting back on its feet. But it was still dangerous. Probably more dangerous now that it was wounded and angry. I pulled out my last 2 flares and waited for it to charge. The final battle was fought on a narrow ledge about 300 feet up the north peak. The bird came at me with its talons extended, moving with surprising speed despite its injured wing. I dodged to the side and triggered a flare, but this time the bird was ready for it. It knocked the flare out of my hand with one wing, and the projectile went spinning off into the valley below. We circled each other on the narrow ledge like gunfighters in a Western movie. The bird was bleeding from several wounds, and I could see that the fire from the first flare had damaged some of its flight feathers. But those eyes were still sharp, still calculating. It feinted left, then came in low, trying to grab me with its talons. I jumped backward and nearly went off the ledge, but managed to catch myself at the last second. The bird pressed its advantage, snapping at me with that massive beak. That's when I remembered the ice axe on my belt. As the bird lunged forward, I brought the axe up in a short, vicious arc. The pick caught the creature in the throat, and suddenly there was blood everywhere. The bird stumbled backward, making horrible choking sounds. I thought I'd killed it, but the wound wasn't deep enough. The bird shook its head, spraying blood across the rock face, and came at me again. This time I was ready. I had my last flare in one hand and the ice axe in the other. When the bird charged, I triggered the flare directly into its face while bringing the axe down on its skull. The creature collapsed, twitched once, and was still. I sat on that ledge for an hour, bleeding and shaking, before I finally worked up the courage to check if it was really dead. But when I approached the body, something impossible happened. The wounds were healing. I watched in fascination and horror as the gash in the creature's throat slowly closed, the edges of the wound knitting together like time-lapse footage of healing skin. Even the damaged feathers seemed to be regenerating. The bird's eyes snapped open. This time I didn't hesitate. I put the ice axe through its skull with every ounce of strength I had left, driving the pick deep into the brain case. The creature convulsed once and went limp, and stayed that way. But I wasn't taking any chances. I used my climbing rope to tie the body to a boulder, and then I rappelled down to the valley floor as fast as I could manage with a dislocated shoulder and 3 cracked ribs. By the time I reached my truck, it was nearly midnight, and I was hypothermic from blood loss and shock. I drove myself to the hospital in Elkins and told them I'd fallen while doing a technical rescue. I never told anyone the truth about what happened on that ledge. I reopened Seneca Rocks 2 weeks later, after I was sure the bird was really dead. The climbing community welcomed the news, though some people grumbled about the mysterious closure and the lack of explanation for what had caused it. I filed my reports carefully, documenting the missing climbers as deaths due to climbing accidents in remote areas. The bodies that were never found were listed as lost in inaccessible terrain, which was technically true. For 3 months, everything was normal. Climbers came and went, the weather was perfect, and no one disappeared. I started to think that maybe I'd solved the problem. Then, on August 15th, I was doing a late patrol when I heard something that made my blood freeze. A scream echoing off the cliff faces. Deep, prehistoric, and unmistakably familiar. I looked up and saw a shadow circling the peaks, wings spread wide against the star-filled sky. It was smaller than the first bird, and its flight pattern was different, more cautious, less confident, but the silhouette was unmistakable. The Thunderbird was back. Or rather, a new one had moved into the territory. I sat in my truck in the empty parking lot, watching the creature patrol the high peaks, and I understood something that chilled me to the bone. The bird I'd killed hadn't been a unique creature. It had been part of a species, a population that had been living in these mountains for who knows how long. And now that the alpha predator was gone, a new one was establishing territory. The next morning, I found fresh talon marks on the cliff face near Cairns West. The new bird was already claiming the hunting grounds. But there was a difference. This bird was more careful than its predecessor. It watched from a distance, learning patterns, studying potential prey with the patience of something that had learned from another's mistakes. It knew that humans could fight back now. Over the next few weeks, I developed a new protocol for managing the situation. I installed high-powered spotlights at key climbing areas, and I started carrying flares on every patrol. I also put together a survival kit for serious climbers, emergency lights, signal mirrors, and instructions on what to do if they encountered something impossible. I never told them what they might encounter, but I made sure they had tools to deal with it. The new bird took its first climber in September, a hotshot from Colorado who was attempting a solo ascent of a route called Yay Gods. We found his gear scattered across impossible ledges, and his body was never recovered. But this time, I was ready. I tracked the bird's hunting patterns and figured out its preferred times and locations. When it struck, I was waiting with spotlights and flares. The confrontation was brief but violent. The bird retreated to the high peaks, wounded but alive. It didn't hunt in the main climbing areas again. That was 4 years ago. I'm still at Seneca Rocks, still keeping watch over the climbing routes and the people who challenge them. The bird is still up there somewhere, and every few months I see it circling the distant peaks. We have an understanding now. That creature and I. It stays in the remote areas where only the most experienced climbers venture. And I make sure those climbers are prepared for more than just difficult rock. Sometimes I think about retiring, finding a nice desk job somewhere far from the mountains. But who would take over? Who else would know what to watch for? What signs to look for? What precautions to take? The climbing guides think I'm crazy. They tell stories about Ranger Liz and her obsession with safety equipment and emergency procedures. They don't know that every light I install, every protocol I implement, every piece of unnecessary gear I recommend might be the difference between life and death. Because the mountains are full of things that don't belong in any guidebook. And some of those things are still hunting. The Seneca called these rocks sacred for a reason. They knew that some places belonged to older things, creatures that were flying these skies before humans ever thought to climb vertical stone. I've learned to respect that knowledge. And I've learned that sometimes The best you can do is maintain a balance between two worlds, the world of human ambition and the world of ancient predators. Every morning, I scan the sky above Seneca Rocks, and every evening, I listen for the sound of wings that shouldn't exist. The thunderbird is still out there, and it's still hunting, but now it knows that its prey can fight back, and that makes all the difference in the world. My name is Daniel Mackenzie, and I've been a park ranger for 20 years. I've seen things in these mountains that would make most folks pack up and move to the city. But what happened in Copper Creek Valley during the winter of 1967 still wakes me up at night, 30 years later. I was 47 then, stationed in the George Washington National Forest in West Virginia. The locals called me Mac, and I knew every trail, every cabin, every family living in those remote hollows. After 2 tours in Vietnam, I thought I'd seen the worst that life could throw at me. I was wrong. November came early that year, and it came hard. By the 3rd week, we already had 4 feet of snow on the ground and temperatures hitting 20 below zero. The Weather Service called it a 100-year storm. Radio contact went dead first, then the phone lines. The mountain communities were cut off from the world. That's when I got worried about the Hutchinson family. The Hutchinsons lived about 50 miles from the nearest road, deep in Copper Creek Valley. Old Henry Hutchinson had built his cabin there in the 1942, raising 6 kids with his wife Martha. They were good people, quiet, kept to themselves, but always friendly when they came to town for supplies. Henry was a big man with gentle eyes who could fix anything with his hands. Martha made the best apple butter in 3 counties. The problem was, nobody had seen them since August. They always come down for winter supplies by October, said Bill Henderson, who ran the general store in town. Henry knows these mountains better than anybody. He wouldn't get caught unprepared. I tried to tell myself they were fine. Maybe they'd stocked up early. Maybe they were just waiting out the storm like smart mountain folks do. But something in my gut kept nagging at me. In 20 years of ranger work, you learn to trust that feeling. On November 24th, I fired up my snowmobile and headed into the backcountry. The machine was a 1965 Ski-Doo, tough as nails but temperamental in the cold. I packed extra fuel, emergency rations, my hunting rifle, and enough gear to last 3 days if something went wrong. The ride up the valley was like traveling through a white hell. Snow fell so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The wind howled through the trees like something alive and angry. Twice, my snowmobile died for no reason, the engine just cutting out like someone had flipped a switch. Each time, it started back up after a few minutes, but it left me feeling uneasy. The old mining road that led to the Hutchinson place was completely buried. I had to follow the creek bed, using the bare patches under rock overhangs to check my compass. But the strangest thing was how the compass kept acting up. No matter which direction I faced, the needle kept swinging toward where I thought the cabin should be. About 2 miles from the homestead, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There were no animal tracks in the snow, none at all. In 20 years of winter patrols, I'd never seen country so empty of life. No deer trails, no rabbit tracks, not even bird marks. It was like every living thing had fled the valley. The silence was wrong too. In a normal winter storm, you hear the wind, the creaking of trees heavy with snow, maybe the call of a winter bird. But here, the only sound was my snowmobile engine and the crunch of snow under my skis. Even when I stopped the engine, the silence felt thick and heavy, like something pressing down on my chest. I found the Hutchinson cabin just before sunset. From a distance, it looked normal enough, smoke rising from the chimney, snow piled high against the walls. But as I got closer, details started jumping out at me that didn't make sense. All the windows were boarded up from the inside. Not storm shutters, these were rough boards nailed over the glass. I could see the nail heads poking through from my side. The front door was barred shut the same way. But smoke was definitely coming from the chimney. I called out, "Henry, Martha, it's Ranger Mackenzie." My voice echoed off the mountains and died away. No answer came from inside the cabin. I walked around the building, looking for another way in. That's when I found the woodpile. Mixed in with the split logs were what looked like large animal bones. But as I got closer, I realized they weren't from any animal I knew. They were too long, too straight. And they had gnaw marks on them, deep gouges that looked almost like human teeth marks, but bigger, much bigger. I kicked through the woodpile with my boot, and my stomach turned over. These weren't animal bones at all. The curved piece I was looking at was clearly a human rib cage. The long, straight bones were leg bones, femurs that had been cracked open, the marrow sucked out. My mind tried to find normal explanations. Maybe the family dog had died, and Henry was burning the remains. Maybe they'd found some old Native American burial ground and were respectfully disposing of the bones. But even as I thought these things, I knew they were lies I was telling myself. I pulled out my service revolver and approached the front door again. The cabin was built solid, thick logs chinked with mud and moss. Henry had built it to last through hard mountain winters. But looking at those boards nailed over the door from the inside, I started to wonder who they were meant to keep out, or what they were meant to keep in. I found a loose board near the back of the cabin and pried it away from a window with my knife. The glass underneath was cracked, but I could see into the main room. What I saw made me wish I hadn't looked. The Hutchinson family was there, all right. All 6 of them, sitting in a circle around the fireplace. They weren't moving, they weren't talking, and they'd been dead for a long time, but they hadn't died from the cold. Henry sat in his rocking chair, his huge frame slumped forward. His left arm was missing from the elbow down. Martha was on the floor beside him, her winter dress torn open. I could see white ribs poking through where her stomach should have been. The 4 kids, ranging from 8 to 16, were arranged around them like they'd been posed there. Each body showed signs of being partially eaten. The smell that came through the broken window made me stumble backward and vomit in the snow. It was the sweet, sick odor of rotting meat mixed with something else, something wild and hungry that I couldn't name. I was still retching when I heard the footsteps. They were coming from behind the cabin, moving slow and deliberate through the deep snow. But these weren't normal footsteps. They sounded too heavy, like something that weighed far more than any man. And they were too widely spaced. Whatever was making them had a stride longer than seemed possible. I drew my gun and crept around the corner of the cabin, following the sound. What I found were footprints that made no sense at all. They started out looking human, size 12 boots, like Henry might have worn. But as the trail led away from the cabin, they changed. The boot prints became deeper, wider. The stride lengthened from normal steps to gaps of 6 feet or more. And about 50 yards from the cabin, the boot prints disappeared entirely. In their place were tracks like nothing I'd ever seen. They looked almost human, but the feet were enormous, at least 18 inches long and half as wide. Instead of 5 toes, there were 4, each ending in what looked like claw marks in the snow. The stride between prints was 8 feet or more. Whatever had made these tracks was walking upright through 4-foot snowdrifts like they were nothing more than grass. I followed the trail for about 100 yards, my gun drawn and my heart hammering. The tracks led straight up the mountainside, through terrain so steep and rocky that even an experienced climber would have trouble in good weather. But these prints showed no signs of slipping or struggling. Whatever made them had just walked up the mountain like it was flat ground. The trail ended at a rock face about 30 feet high. There were scratch marks in the stone, deep gouges that looked fresh. And there, about 20 feet up the cliff, was a dark opening in the rocks that I'd never noticed before. A cave. Something was living up there. Something that had come down to the Hutchinson cabin and done things that my mind didn't want to accept. I looked back toward the cabin, and that's when I saw it. Just for a second, silhouetted against the window I'd looked through earlier, was a shape that was almost human, but not quite right. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and thin in a way that hurt to look at. Its arms hung down past its knees, and its head was too large for its body. But what froze my blood was that it was watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. My snowmobile wouldn't start. I pulled the cord 20 times, checked the fuel, cleaned the spark plug, nothing. The engine was completely dead. The sun was setting, and the temperature was dropping fast. I was 50 miles from the nearest help, and something was in those mountains with me. Something that had killed an entire family and left their bodies arranged like a sick joke. I had 2 choices: spend the night in the cabin with the corpses, or try to make it back to town on foot through a blizzard. Neither option seemed likely to keep me alive until morning. That's when the howling started. The sound came from somewhere up the mountain. a long, mournful wail that was almost human, but not quite. It rose and fell like a siren, echoing off the rocks until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then it stopped, and the silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. I tried the snowmobile again, still nothing. The metal was so cold it burned my fingers even through my gloves. Night was coming fast, and the temperature was dropping toward 30 below. I had maybe an hour before hypothermia became a real problem. The cabin was my only option. I pried more boards away from the back window and climbed inside, trying not to look at the bodies. The smell was overwhelming. Death and decay and that wild, hungry odor that seemed to cling to everything. I pulled my scarf over my nose and mouth, but it didn't help much. The fireplace was still burning, which explained the smoke I'd seen. Someone had been feeding it recently. The thought that one of the Hutchinsons might still be alive crossed my mind, but one look at the bodies told me that was impossible. They'd been dead for weeks, maybe months. So, who was tending the fire? I found Henry's journal on the mantelpiece, its leather cover stained with something dark that I didn't want to identify. The last entry was dated September 15th, more than 2 months ago. His handwriting, usually neat and careful, became increasingly shaky as I read. Asterisk September 3rd. Early snow today, maybe 2 inches. Martha says it's too early, but I've seen early winters before. Better safe than sorry. Asterisk. Asterisk September 8th. Snow keeps coming, already knee-deep and no sign of stopping. Radio went out yesterday, can't get through to town. Asterisk. Asterisk September 12th. Food running low. Tried to hunt, but there's nothing out there. No deer, no rabbits, nothing. Like all the animals just vanished. Kids are getting scared. Martha won't stop crying. Asterisk. Asterisk September 15th. Found tracks around the cabin this morning. Not from any animal I know. They're huge, and they go right up to the windows. Something was watching us sleep. I can feel it out there, waiting. So hungry. Always so hungry. Asterisk. The entries stopped there, but someone had written more. Scratchy, desperate words, scrawled in what looked like blood. Asterisk, it's inside now. In my head. The hunger is so strong. Can't think about anything else. The children look so tender. Asterisk. I dropped the journal like it was on fire. That's when I heard footsteps on the roof. They started at one end of the cabin and moved slowly toward the other, each step deliberate and heavy. Whatever was up there had to weigh at least 300 pounds. The roof beams groaned under the weight, and small bits of dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. The footsteps stopped directly over my head. I raised my gun toward the ceiling, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. The silence stretched out until I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then something started scratching at the roof. Long, slow scrapes like claws dragging across wood. It was trying to tear its way in. I backed toward the window I'd climbed through, but before I could reach it, the scratching stopped. A new sound took its place. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from deep underground. It was the sound a stomach makes when it's empty, but amplified 100 times. The thing was hungry. A chunk of wood the size of my fist crashed down from the ceiling, followed by another. Splinters showered the room as claws tore through the roof above the fireplace. I could see glimpses of something pale and skeletal between the rafters. I dove through the window, just as the entire section of roof caved in. Behind me, I heard a thud as something heavy hit the cabin floor. Then came a sound that made my skin crawl, the wet, tearing noise of something feeding. I didn't look back. I ran. The snow was waist-deep, and every step was a battle. My legs burned with the effort, and the cold air seared my lungs. Behind me, I could hear sounds from the cabin, breaking wood, snarling, and underneath it all, that horrible stomach-growling noise. I made it maybe 200 yards before I had to stop. My heart felt like it was going to explode, and I was sweating despite the cold. When I turned around, the cabin was dark. No more firelight, no more sounds, just silence and the falling snow. But something was following me. I could see it moving between the trees, a pale shape that seemed to flow through the snow without leaving tracks. It stayed just at the edge of my vision, never coming close enough for me to get a clear look. But I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. The hunger was starting. It began as just a nagging emptiness in my stomach, easy enough to ignore. But as I struggled through the snow, the feeling grew stronger. I found myself thinking about food, not the emergency rations in my pack, but something else. Something warm and fresh and red. I shook my head, trying to clear the thoughts away. But they kept coming back, stronger each time. Images flashed through my mind that made me sick, but also made my mouth water. The thing in the trees was getting closer. I could hear it now, moving through the snow with a sound like breaking bones. And underneath that, constant and maddening, was the growling of an empty stomach that could never be filled. My hands were starting to shake, and not from the cold. The hunger was spreading through my body like poison, making me think thoughts that weren't my own. I caught myself looking at my own hands and wondering what they would taste like. That's when I realized the truth. Whatever had killed the Hutchinson family wasn't just hunting me. It was trying to make me into one of them. The attacks came in waves after that, not physical attacks, but something worse. Thoughts that weren't mine kept flooding my brain. Images of tender meat, the satisfaction of cracking bones to get at the marrow inside, the sweet taste of fresh blood on a cold night. I stumbled and fell face first in the snow. The cold shock cleared my head for a moment, long enough to understand what was happening. The thing following me, whatever it was, could somehow plant ideas in people's minds. That's how it had gotten to Henry Hutchinson. It had filled his head with hunger until he couldn't think about anything else. Until he'd looked at his own family and seen them as food. I forced myself to stand and keep moving. The snow was getting deeper, and the wind was picking up. My flashlight battery was dying, and I was still 30 miles from the nearest road. But stopping meant giving in to the thoughts, and I knew where that led. The pale shape was closer now, maybe 50 yards behind me. For the first time, I got a clear look at what was hunting me. It had been human once. The basic shape was there. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But everything was wrong. It stood at least 12 feet tall, with arms that hung down to its knees. Its skin was gray-white, stretched tight over bones that showed through like sticks under a sheet. Its head was too big, skull elongated and crowned with what looked like antlers made of bone. But the worst part was its face. The eyes were black holes in a skull covered with skin like old leather. Its mouth was too wide, filled with teeth that were clearly meant for tearing meat. And it was smiling at me with those teeth, like it knew something I didn't, like it knew I was already lost. The hunger hit me again, stronger this time. I doubled over as my stomach cramped with emptiness. When was the last time I'd eaten? This morning? Yesterday? I couldn't remember. All I could think about was food, and the only living thing in these mountains was me. I bit down on my tongue hard enough to draw blood. The pain broke through the hunger thoughts, at least for a moment. I had to focus on something else, anything else. I started reciting the Lord's Prayer, something my Scottish grandmother had taught me as a child. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. The creature stopped moving. I kept praying, louder now. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. The thing let out a shriek that sounded like a mountain cat and something else mixed together. It took a step back, those black eyes fixed on me with what looked like rage, prayer. Of course, my grandmother had told me stories about the Wendigo when I was young, cannibalistic spirits from Native American legend that could possess people during harsh winters. She'd said prayer was the only thing that could hold them back. I'd always thought they were just stories. Give us this day our daily bread, I continued, backing away through the snow. The Wendigo, because that's what it was, no point denying it now, followed but kept its distance. Every word seemed to cause it pain, but I couldn't pray forever. My voice was already getting hoarse from the cold, and the hunger thoughts were fighting back stronger with each word. It was like trying to hold back an avalanche with my bare hands. The creature seemed to know this. It started circling me, staying just out of range but never taking those black eyes off me, waiting for my voice to give out or my faith to crack. I stumbled backward and felt something hard against my spine. A tree, a big pine tree with low branches heavy with snow. An idea started forming in my mind, probably a stupid idea, but the only one I had. I reached into my pack and pulled out the emergency flare I always carried on winter patrols. The Wendigo saw the movement and came closer, thinking I was weakening. I was weakening. The hunger was so strong now that I could barely think straight. My hands were shaking as I pulled the cap off the flare. "And forgive us our debts," I whispered, my voice nearly gone. "As we forgive our debtors." The Wendigo crouched down, getting ready to charge. Those long arms could cover the distance between us in one leap. I struck the flare. Red fire exploded between us, bright as the sun. The Wendigo screamed and stumbled backward, its gray skin smoking where the light touched it. I held the flare up like a torch, and the creature retreated further. Fire. The old stories said Wendigos feared fire, but a flare only burns for 15 minutes. I grabbed handfuls of the dry pine needles from the lower branches and held them to the flare until they caught. Then I touched the burning needles to the tree itself. The pine was heavy with sap and caught fire like it had been soaked in gasoline. Within seconds, the entire tree was blazing. The Wendigo backed away, shrieking and covering its eyes. But I wasn't done. I ran to the next tree and set it ablaze, then the next one. Soon I had a wall of fire between myself and the creature. But walls work both ways. I was trapped just as much as it was. The Wendigo began to change. As I watched in horror, it seemed to grow even taller. The antlers on its head lengthened and branched out like a real deer's rack. Its skin became more translucent, showing the black veins underneath, and its mouth opened wider, revealing rows of teeth like a shark's. This was its true form. It threw back its head and howled. Not the almost human sound from before, but something that belonged to winter itself. The sound of wind through empty spaces, of ice cracking under impossible pressure, of everything dying and never coming back. The hunger in my mind exploded into actual pain. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as foreign thoughts tried to take over completely. Images flashed behind my eyes. Henry Hutchinson, looking at his sleeping children and seeing only meat. The first bite that tasted so sweet he couldn't stop. The way his family looked at him, with understanding in their final moments. The Wendigo walked through the fire. The flames didn't burn it, just made its skin glow like old bone. It moved slowly, savoring my terror, those black eyes fixed on mine. When it reached me, it knelt down so we were at eye level. "So hungry," it whispered, in a voice like breaking glass. "Always so hungry. You understand now." I did understand. The hunger wasn't just for food. It was for warmth, for life, for everything the creature had lost when it chose cannibalism over death. It would never be satisfied, no matter how much it consumed. But I also understood something else. I pulled out my service revolver and put it against the Wendigo's chest. The creature laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Bullets cannot kill hunger," it said. "No," I agreed. "But they can kill the hungry." I pulled the trigger 6 times, emptying the cylinder. Each bullet punched through the creature's chest with a wet thud. Black blood that steamed in the cold air poured out of the wounds. The Wendigo looked down at the holes in its chest, then back at me. It was still smiling. "Now you must choose," it whispered. "Starve in the cold, or become like me." Then it collapsed backward into the snow and didn't move again. I don't remember much about the next 3 days. The rescue team found me 20 miles from the Hutchinson cabin, half frozen and babbling about monsters in the woods. They said I'd been walking in circles, that my tracks showed I'd passed the same landmarks multiple times. Hypothermia, they said. Hallucinations brought on by extreme cold and stress. They never found the Wendigo's body. The official report listed the Hutchinson family's deaths as carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty wood stove. 7 people died that winter, the report said. A tragic accident caused by inadequate ventilation in an old cabin. I knew better, but who was going to believe me? I spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from frostbite and exhaustion. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive. They couldn't explain how I'd survived 3 days in sub-zero temperatures with minimal supplies. They also couldn't explain the tooth marks on my arm, bite marks that matched no known animal. When I got out, I requested a transfer. The Park Service sent me to Arizona, where the only white stuff you see is sand and the only things that howl at night are coyotes. I told my supervisor I needed a warmer climate for my health. That was true enough. But every winter, I make phone calls to contacts back in West Virginia. Every winter, there are reports of missing hikers in the George Washington National Forest. People who go into the mountains when the snow gets deep and never come out. The search and rescue teams blame the weather, the terrain, the dozens of ways the mountains can kill you if you're not careful. I know better. The hunger never really left me. Oh, it's not the overwhelming compulsion it was that night in the mountains. But sometimes, especially when I'm very tired or very cold, I catch myself thinking thoughts that aren't quite right, looking at people and wondering what they would taste like, imagining the satisfaction of cracking bones with my teeth. When that happens, I pray. My grandmother's prayers, the ones that saved my life, in Copper Creek Valley, they keep the thoughts at bay, most of the time. But I know that somewhere deep inside me, a piece of that Wendigo is still alive, waiting for a moment of weakness, a time when I'm too tired or too hungry or too cold to fight it off. I've never married, never had children. Some hungers are too dangerous to pass on. Last month, a park ranger in West Virginia called me. Young guy, full of confidence and book learning. He wanted to know about the Hutchinson case, said he'd found some old files that didn't make sense, said there were reports of animal attacks in Copper Creek Valley going back to the 1800s, all happening during harsh winters. I told him what I tell everyone who asks. Stay out of those mountains when the snow gets deep. Some places are hungry, and they've been hungry for a long time. He laughed and said he didn't believe in ghost stories. I hope he's right. I hope what happened to me was just hypothermia-induced hallucinations, just a tired mind trying to make sense of a terrible tragedy. I hope the Wendigo died when I shot it, that its body rotted away in the spring thaw like anything else. But every winter, when the first snow starts to fall and I feel that familiar ache in my bones, I remember those black eyes watching me through the trees. I remember the smile full of teeth that were made for tearing flesh. And I remember how good the hunger felt, just for a moment, before I found the strength to fight it off. Some things are worse than dying. Some things are so hungry they can never be satisfied. And some hungers, once tasted, never really go away. My name is Daniel Mackenzie, and 30 years ago, I met something in the mountains of West Virginia that changed me forever. I'm an old man now, living in the desert where winter never comes. But I still wake up some nights, remembering the taste of my own blood and wondering what human flesh would feel like between my teeth. That's when I pray the hardest, because I know that somewhere in those mountains, when the snow gets deep and the temperature drops below zero, something is still waiting, still hungry, still looking for someone weak enough, cold enough, desperate enough to make the same choice Henry Hutchinson made. The choice between death and something much worse. Don't go into the mountains when the snow falls heavy. Don't trust your hunger when the cold makes you desperate. And if you ever see tracks in the snow that start human and become something else, don't follow them. Some paths lead to places you can never come back from.